Hello, dear friends, and welcome back to another journey through time. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. Wherever you are right now, whether you're tucked into bed, settled on a comfortable couch, or simply finding a quiet moment in your day, I want you to know that this time is yours. This is your space to rest, to learn, and to let your mind wander gently through the corridors of history. Take a moment, if you will, to get truly comfortable. Adjust your pillow. Pull your blanket a little closer. Dim the lights or let the darkness embrace you completely. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Unclench your jaw. Allow your body to become heavy, supported fully by whatever surface holds you now. There's nowhere else you need to be. Nothing else you need to do. Just breathe and listen. Tonight we're going to explore a world that existed 2,000 years ago, yet shaped everything about the world we live in today. We're going to step into the sandals of someone who lived in ancient Rome, but not as a citizen, not as a soldier or a senator. Tonight, you're going to experience what life was like for the millions of people who had no freedom, no rights, no voice. Tonight, we're going to understand what it meant to be a slave in the Roman Empire. Now, I know what you might be thinking. You've seen the movies. You've read about ancient Rome, the glory, the architecture, the mighty legions, the Colosseum, the aqueducts, the roads that stretched across continents. Rome was magnificent, wasn't it? A civilization of unprecedented power and innovation. But here's what those history books often gloss over, what those epic films conveniently forget. Rome was built on the backs of slaves, not metaphorically, literally. Every magnificent building, every comfortable household, every luxury enjoyed by Roman citizens, was made possible by the labor of human beings who were considered property. Estimates suggest that at the height of the Roman Empire, between 25 and 40% of the population were slaves. Think about that for a moment. In a city of 1 million people, up to 400,000 of them were owned by someone else. They had no control over their bodies, their time, their future. They could be bought, sold, beaten, killed all legally, all without consequence for their owners. And here's the thing that might surprise you. This could have been anyone. You didn't have to commit a crime to become a slave. You didn't have to do anything wrong. You could be a scholar, a merchant, a parent, a child. One day you're living your life, and the next, you're standing on an auction block, being examined like livestock with a price tag attached to your worth as a human being. So tonight, I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine that you wake up tomorrow, but it's not tomorrow. It's 2,000 years ago. And you are not free. You are owned. Every decision about your life, what you eat, where you sleep, whether you live or die, belongs to someone else. Could you survive it? Could you endure even a single day? By the time our journey ends tonight, I think you'll understand why the answer is probably not. Not because you're weak. Not because you lack courage or resilience, but because what Roman slaves endured on a daily basis was beyond what most human beings in the modern world could even comprehend. The physical demands alone would break us. The psychological torture would shatter us. The complete absence of hope would destroy us. But we're going to walk this path together, you and I gently, carefully, with respect for those who lived through this reality. We'll move through a single day from the moment you wake in the cold darkness before dawn to the moment you collapse back into sleep at night, If you're fortunate enough to survive that long, we'll feel the hunger, the exhaustion, the fear. We'll understand the hierarchy, the punishments, the small mercies, and the great cruelties. And then we'll explore the stories beyond the daily grind, the rebellion of Spartacus, the invisible slaves history forgot, and what happened to those rare few who gained their freedom. This is a story about survival, about endurance, about the worst of humanity and the resilience of the human spirit. It's a story that needs to be told even in whispers, even as you drift toward sleep. Because understanding suffering, even suffering from 2,000 years ago, makes us more human, more compassionate, more grateful for the freedoms we possess. So settle in, dear friends. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Let your eyelids grow heavy. You're safe here. You're free here. And together, we're going to remember those who were not. Let us begin. You don't remember the exact moment everything changed. Or perhaps you remember it too well, and it plays behind your closed eyelids every night. The moment your life as a free person ended, and your life as property began. Maybe you were a soldier, a good one too. You fought bravely for your homeland, whatever homeland that was. Gaul, perhaps, or Germania, Britannia, Hispania, Thracia, one of the countless territories that Rome swallowed like a great beast, consuming everything in its path. You stood in formation with your brothers, your shield locked with theirs, and you faced the Roman legions. You fought well, you fought hard. But you lost. And when Rome conquered your people, they didn't just take your land, they took you. The victorious Roman general standing in his polished armor, laurel crown already being prepared for his triumph back in Rome, he looked across the battlefield at the survivors, the wounded, the captured, and he saw profit. He saw merchandise. You were no longer a warrior. You were inventory. Or perhaps your story is different. Perhaps you were never a soldier at all. Perhaps you were simply in the wrong place when the pirates came. Yes, pirates? The Mediterranean was full of them, despite Rome's attempts to control the seas. You were on a merchant ship or traveling along the coast when their vessel appeared. They moved fast, efficient, practiced. They took everything of value, including you, and they sold you at the next port to a slave trader who specialized in fresh merchandise. Or maybe it was debt. This one is particularly cruel, isn't it? You were a free Roman citizen once. You had a life, a family, a business perhaps, but the harvest failed. Or your business partner betrayed you. Or you got sick and couldn't work. The debts piled up like stones, crushing you slowly. And Roman law was clear. If you couldn't pay what you owed, your creditors could demand your freedom as payment. You could be debt-bonded, enslaved by those to whom you owed money. Your children, too. An entire family could disappear into servitude because of grain that didn't grow or contracts that went wrong. Or, and this is perhaps the darkest possibility of all, you were born into this. Your mother was a slave, which means you are a slave. It doesn't matter who your father was. It doesn't matter that you've never known freedom, never made a choice that led to this circumstance. You emerged from the womb already owned by someone else. Your first breath was taken as property. However it happened, you find yourself standing in the slave market. The forum, or one of the specialized markets near the ports. The smell hits you first, unwashed bodies pressed together. Fierce sweat, urine from those who've lost control of their bladders in terror. the sickly sweet smell of the perfumes and oils the slave traders used to try to mask the stench of misery. You're standing on a platform, a low stone platform, elevated just enough that the buyers can see you clearly. You're wearing minimal clothing. They've stripped away whatever you had before. The buyers need to see the merchandise. They need to examine you. Are you strong? Look at those arms, those legs. Can you work hard? Open your mouth. Let them see your teeth, like you're a horse being evaluated. Turn around. Bend over. They need to check for scars, for signs of disease, for evidence of past escape attempts. Around your neck there's a sign, a placard. It lists your origin, your age, your skills if you have any. From Gaul, age 25. Field labor, or Greek, literate, suitable for teaching, or simply healthy child. Age 7. Trainable. The auctioneer is calling out prices. His voice is bored, mechanical. He does this every day. To him, you are no different from the amphorae of wine being sold 3 stalls over. The buyers shout their bids. Some are wealthy landowners looking for field hands. Some are merchants needing help in their shops. Some are wealthy matrons looking for household servants. Some have darker purposes in mind, and you can see it in their eyes as they examine you. You're trying not to cry, or maybe you're beyond crying. Maybe you've moved into that strange, numb space where nothing feels real anymore. This cannot be happening. This cannot be your life. You had a name. You had an identity. You had people who loved you, perhaps. You had dreams of the future. And now you have a price. 1,500 denarii. That's what someone paid for you. You don't know if that's a lot or a little. You don't know if you should feel relieved or insulted. A skilled slave, a doctor, a teacher, a beautiful young person might go for much more. Thousands of denarii. Tens of thousands for someone truly exceptional. A common laborer might sell for less. You are somewhere in the middle. Average. Unremarkable. Property. Your new owner approaches. You see their face for the first time. Will they be cruel? Will they be kind? The truth is, it almost doesn't matter. Even the kindest master is still a master. Even the gentlest owner still owns you. You have no rights. None. Under Roman law, you are a res, a thing. You can be punished without trial, beaten without cause, sold without warning, killed without consequence. They attach a collar around your neck. Metal, usually bronze or iron. It's inscribed with information. Your owner's name, where you live now, instructions to return you if you run away. I have run away. Return me to Marcus Aurelius Severus at the villa near Tiber. Reward offered. Some collars are lighter, almost decorative. Some are heavy, designed to remind you every moment of your status. Yours is somewhere in between. You feel its weight. You will always feel its weight. They tell you your new name. Many slaves lose their birth names, especially if they're foreign. You might be called after your place of origin, Gallus, Cyrus, Germanus, or given a Greek name regardless of your actual origin. Romans associated Greek names with slavery, Philippus, Demetrius, Eugenia, or simply named after your function. Coquus, cook, cursor, runner, pister, baker. Your old name? The one your mother called you? The one that meant something about who you were meant to become. That name doesn't matter anymore. That person is gone. As they lead you away from the market chain connecting you to other newly purchased slaves, all of you stumbling together like a miserable chain of humanity. You try to understand how this is real. Yesterday you were a person. Today you're property. Yesterday you had agency, autonomy, choice. Today you have none of those things. Every decision about your life now belongs to someone else. And the truly terrifying part? This is permanent, or might as well be. Some slaves are eventually freed manumission, they call it. But most die in servitude. Most never know freedom again. You could be 12 years old or 60, and either way, you might spend the rest of your life as someone's possession. The sun is setting as you arrive at your new home. Whether it's a grand villa or a modest city house or a rural farm, this is where your new life begins. The other slaves look at you with a mixture of pity and resignation. They were once where you are now, standing confused and devastated, trying to understand how to survive something unsurvivable. An older slave, their face lined with years and sorrows, catches your eye. They don't say anything. They don't need to. Their expression tells you everything. You'll learn. You'll adapt. Or you'll die. Those are the only options. You're taken to the slave quarters, shown where you'll sleep, given your duties, told the rules. Don't speak unless spoken to. Keep your eyes down, move quickly when called, never question, never resist, obey, always obey. That night, lying on a thin mat on the floor, surrounded by strangers who share your fate, you stare into the darkness. Your body aches. Your heart aches more. You think about your old life, if you can remember it. Some slaves try to forget it's easier that way. Some slaves hold on to their memories like treasures, the only possessions that can't be taken away. You don't sleep, not really. You drift in and out of something like sleep, but it's restless, broken by the sounds of others crying softly in the darkness, by the cold seeping up through the stone floor, by the weight of understanding settling into your bones. Tomorrow you will wake before dawn. Tomorrow your real work begins. Tomorrow you will learn what it truly means to be owned. And you will wake every day after that, for as long as your body holds out, and do it all again. Day after day after day. This is your life now. This is what you have become. A Raman slave. The darkness is absolute when you wake. Not the darkness of a bedroom with a window where moonlight or starlight creeps in around the edges. Not the darkness of a modern night where ambient light always manages to find its way through curtains. This is complete, total darkness. The kind that feels like it has weight. The kind that presses against your eyes even when they're open. You're in the slave quarters, underground usually. Roman houses were built with the slaves' rooms in the basement or a back section far from the main living areas. No windows, no natural light, no fresh air really, except what manages to circulate through the doorway that leads to the stairs. The air is thick with the smell of bodies, 30, 40, sometimes 50 slaves, all sleeping in one large room. The smell of sweat, of unwashed clothing, of the chamber pots in the corner that won't be emptied until morning chores begin. You're cold. It's always cold down here, or if it's summer, it's stifling hot. There's no climate control, no temperature regulation. Stone walls and stone floor. In winter, the cold seeps into your bones no matter how tightly you curl into yourself. The blanket they've given you, if you have one, is thin, rough wool, scratchy against your skin. It barely covers your body. You share sleeping space on a raised wooden platform that runs along the walls, packed in close to other bodies because space is limited and your comfort is not a priority. You've learned not to move too much in your sleep. The person next to you needs their space too. You've all developed this careful awareness, even in sleep, of where your body is in relation to others. An elbow in someone's ribs, a foot in someone's face, these things cause conflict, and conflict among slaves is dangerous. You need each other. You're all each other has. But now you're waking, and you're not entirely sure why. There's no alarm clock, no one shaking your shoulder. No rooster crowing, those are up in the courtyard, and their sound doesn't reach down here. So how do you know it's time to wake? The answer is both simple and sad. You've learned. Your body has learned. After weeks, months, maybe years of this routine, your body has internalized when it needs to wake, before the household stirs, before anyone comes down to kick you awake if you've overslept. You've trained yourself through fear and necessity to rise before you're punished for staying asleep. Some of the other slaves are stirring too. You hear them in the darkness. The rustle of straw mattresses, the creak of the wooden platforms, soft groans as stiff bodies attempt to move. Someone coughs, a wet, rattling cough that's been getting worse for weeks. No one mentions it. If you're too sick to work, you're useless. And useless slaves are sold off to mines or mills, which is essentially a death sentence. So everyone pretends not to notice that cough. You sit up slowly. Your back aches. Your shoulders ache. Your feet ache. Everything aches, actually. The work you did yesterday has left its mark on your muscles, and you barely had time to rest before sleep claimed you. And now, after too few hours of sleep, you're expected to do it all again. Your stomach growls. It's been doing that for hours, probably, but you notice it more now that you're awake. Your last meal was yesterday's evening ration. A piece of dark bread, some watered wine, maybe a few olives, if you were lucky. It wasn't enough. It's never enough. But complaining accomplishes nothing except maybe earning you less food tomorrow. So you've learned to ignore the constant gnawing hunger. Someone has managed to light a small oil lamp. The flickering light doesn't reach far, but it's enough to see shadowy forms moving around you. The hierarchies exist even here, even in the slave quarters. The slaves who've been here longest, who've earned slight privileges through years of service, they might get the slightly better sleeping spots, away from the drafts, away from the dampest areas. The newer slaves, like you, if you're recently arrived, get the worst spots. There's a woman older, her hair gray, her hands gnarled with arthritis, who seems to be in charge among the slaves. Not officially. Masters don't appoint slave leaders. But informally, she's the one people look to. She's survived 15 years in this household. 15 years. That's remarkable, really. Many don't last that long. She knows the rhythms of the house, the preferences of the master and mistress, the ways to avoid punishment. The younger slaves watch her, trying to learn. She's already moving toward the chamber pots. Someone needs to empty them before the household wakes. It's one of the first tasks of the day, and also one of the most unpleasant. The smell as the pots are moved makes your eyes water. But it has to be done. Everything has to be done, whether you want to or not. You swing your legs off the sleeping platform. Your feet touch the cold stone floor, and you suppress a shiver. You have sandals, but they're worn thin. The leather is cracking in places. They won't last much longer, and you don't know if they'll be replaced. Maybe, maybe not. Some slaves work barefoot, their feet developing thick calluses as protection against rough surfaces. There's a cistern in the corner, a large ceramic jar where water is stored. It's for slaves to drink from, to splash on faces, to use for morning ablutions. The water is cold, always cold. You cup some in your hands and bring it to your face, gasping slightly at the temperature. It wakes you up, at least. Makes you alert. You need to be alert. Mistakes made while half asleep can earn punishment. You can hear sounds from upstairs now, faint but present. The household is beginning to stir. The master might not be awake, yet wealthy Romans often slept later, secure in the knowledge that their slaves would handle the morning preparations. But the senior slaves who work directly with the family, they're already moving upstairs. The body slaves who help the master dress, the personal maids who attend to the mistress, the pedagogues who are responsible for waking the children, they've already left the slave quarters to begin their specific duties. That leaves you and the others to handle the countless tasks that keep a Roman household functioning. Someone needs to light fires in every room, and there are many rooms in a wealthy household. Someone needs to heat water for washing. Someone needs to begin preparing breakfast in the kitchen. Someone needs to sweep the atrium, the tablinum, the triclinium. Someone needs to tend to the household lararium, the shrine to the family's gods. Someone needs to feed the dogs, if there are dogs. And all of this needs to happen invisibly. That's the trick of it. The family will wake to a house that is already warm, already clean, already functioning. They won't see you lighting the fires, or carrying the water, or sweeping the floors. You're supposed to be present but invisible, there but not noticed. Your labor makes their comfort possible, but they shouldn't have to witness the labor itself. You've been assigned to the kitchen this morning. It's one of the more demanding assignments, but also one where you might sneak a bit of extra food if you're clever and the cook is in a good mood. The cook, a large man with burn scars up both arms from years near the flames, rules the kitchen like a tyrant, but a fair one. He knows that hungry slaves make mistakes, so he occasionally allows a piece of bread or a sip of whatever's cooking. You make your way through the dim corridors toward the kitchen. Other slaves pass you, all moving with purpose. No one speaks. Speech is for later, for the brief moments of respite you might find in a day. Morning is for work. Silent, efficient work. The kitchen is already warmer than the slave quarters. The fire never completely dies overnight. There are coals still glowing in the large brick oven. Your first task is to bring these back to full flame. You reach for the firewood stacked against the wall. Oak usually, sometimes olive wood. You feed the coals, blowing gently to encourage them. The smoke stings your eyes, your lungs. You've learned to breathe shallowly while doing this, but it doesn't help much. As the flames grow, so does the light. You can see the kitchen properly now, the hanging herbs and onions, the amphorae of oil and wine lined against the wall, the knives and cooking implements, the work table stained with the residue of 1,000 meals. This is where you'll spend the next several hours, helping prepare breakfast for a family who will never thank you for it. Outside, beyond the kitchen's small high window, the sky is just beginning to show the faintest hint of gray. Dawn is coming. The city will wake soon. Rome will come alive with merchants and soldiers and citizens going about their free lives. But you're already awake. You've been awake. And you'll be working long after they've gone to bed tonight. This is how every day begins. In darkness, in cold, in hunger, in the knowledge that your body doesn't belong to you, and neither does your time. The grinding wheel has begun to turn, and you're caught beneath it. The household is waking now. You can hear it happening in layers. First, the body slaves entering the master's cubiculum, his bedroom. Their voices are soft, deferential. "Dominic, good morning. The water is prepared for you." The master grunts something in response. You can't hear the words from where you are in the kitchen, but you can imagine them. Every master sounds the same in the morning, imperious, expecting everything to be ready, which of course it is. The kitchen is getting hot now. The fire you coaxed back to life has grown into a proper blaze, and the heat radiates through the room. In winter, this warmth is almost pleasant, a relief from the cold of the slave quarters. In summer, it's suffocating, but the fire is necessary. Breakfast must be prepared, water must be heated, and the work continues regardless of the temperature. You're assigned to carry water this morning. Heavy ceramic jugs that hold about 3 gallons each. The water comes from the cistern in the courtyard, rainwater, collected from the roof, supplemented by water carried from the public fountains. Romans are proud of their aqueducts, of the abundant water flowing into their city. But that water doesn't magically appear in private homes. Slaves make it appear. You hoist a full jug onto your shoulder. The weight settles into the muscle, already sore from yesterday. The jug is slick on the outside from splashed water, and you have to be careful. If you drop it, if you spill too much, there will be consequences. You've seen other slaves beaten for less, so you move carefully, even though carefully means slowly, and slowly sometimes earns its own punishment. Your destination is the master's bathing room. Not the public baths, those are for socializing, for conducting business, while soaking in hot pools. No, this is the private bath attached to his sleeping chamber. The water you carry will be heated and poured into his washing basin. He'll stand while slaves, not you, but others specially assigned to this intimate task, sponge his body clean, oil his skin, scrape the oil off with a strigil, then perhaps oil him again. The entire process takes perhaps 15 minutes. Your hauling water for it takes longer. You make multiple trips, kitchen to courtyard, courtyard to bath. Upstairs, down corridors, trying to be quick, but not so quick that you splash water on the expensive floor tiles. The family recently had new mosaics installed in the tablinum, and the overseer made it very clear that any slave who damages them will regret it. You don't know exactly what that means, but you don't want to find out. On your 4th trip, you pass the mistress's chambers. Her door is open, and you risk a quick glance inside. She's seated on a stool, while her ornatrix, her hair-styling slave, works on the elaborate coiffure that wealthy Roman women favor. The ornatrix's hands move quickly, pinning and arranging and curling. It will take her over an hour to complete the style. If the mistress doesn't like the result, the ornatrix might be slapped, or have her own hair cut off as punishment, or worse. You keep moving, eyes down, invisible. In the triclinium, the dining room, other slaves are already preparing for breakfast. The tables are being wiped down. Cushions are being arranged on the couches. Fresh flowers are being placed in vases. Romans of wealth eat their meals reclining, propped on one elbow. It looks luxurious, but you know the slaves who serve those meals are standing the entire time. Standing, pouring, fetching, clearing. For hours. Back in the kitchen, the cook is in full form. He's shouting orders in the particular way that people who work under constant pressure develop. It's not personal cruelty, well, not entirely. It's the stress of having to produce perfect meals with limited ingredients and unlimited expectations. Breakfast for the family might include fresh bread, cheese, olives, honey, dates, cold meats from last night's dinner. For the slaves, if you eat breakfast at all, it's leftover bread and water. If you're lucky, maybe a bit of olive oil to soften the bread. One of the younger slaves, a boy, maybe 10 years old, is struggling to knead dough. His arms are tired. The cook notices, barks at him to work faster. The boy's eyes fill with tears, but he doesn't cry. He learned quickly not to cry. Tears accomplish nothing here except possibly earning more mockery or punishment. You feel a pang of sympathy, but you can't help him. Everyone has their assigned tasks, and interfering, even kindly, can cause problems. The hierarchy must be maintained. The work must flow. You're set next to light fires in the family's private rooms. Each cubiculum has a small brazier for warmth. You carry a pot of hot coals from the kitchen, carefully, so carefully. Hot coals dropped on wooden floors have started fires that destroyed entire insulae apartment buildings. In a wealthy domus like this, such a disaster would mean certain death for whatever slave caused it. You enter the master's oldest son's room. He's still asleep, sprawled across his bed in the boneless way of teenagers everywhere, across all of time. He's maybe 16. Old enough to have his own body slave who should have woken him by now. But the boy must have dismissed his slave last night, wanting privacy or independence or whatever young Roman men want. You move quietly. You place the coals in the brazier. Add some small kindling. Blow gently until flames appear. The room warms. The boy doesn't stir. You notice a wax tablet on his desk as homework from his tutor, probably. Latin exercises, mathematical problems, things this boy gets to learn while boys his own age in the slave quarters are hauling water and lighting fires. You slip out before he wakes. Being caught alone in a room with a member of the family can be dangerous, especially for younger slaves. Assumptions get made. Accusations get thrown. It's safer to remain invisible. The morning progresses in this way, task after task after task. Every room in the house requires attention. The atrium's impluvium, the decorative pool that collects rainwater, needs to be cleaned. Leaves and debris have fallen in overnight. Someone must wade in, gather the detritus, make it pristine again. That someone is you. The water is shockingly cold. The sun hasn't been up long enough to warm anything yet. You roll your tunic up and step in. The water comes to mid-thigh. Your feet sink into the silt at the bottom. You work quickly, scooping out leaves with your hands, depositing them in a basket another slave holds. Your legs go numb from the cold, but you don't slow down. The family will be entering the atrium soon for breakfast, and it must be perfect. By the time you finish, your legs are shaking from the cold. You step out, water streaming from your clothing. There's no time to change or dry off. The mistress is calling for her morning wine mixed with water, of course, as is proper, and she wants honey cakes and fresh fruit, and her favorite cushion brought to the garden where she prefers to break her fast when weather permits. Slaves scramble to fulfill each demand. You're sent to the garden with a cushion, a heavy thing stuffed with wool and covered in embroidered fabric that probably cost more than your life is worth. You arrange it carefully on the bench beneath the colonnade. The garden is beautiful, you notice despite your exhaustion. Roses, lavender, herbs both culinary and decorative. A small fountain burbles peacefully. Birds sing in the trees. It's the kind of beauty that makes you ache, because you can see it, smell it, hear it, but you can't enjoy it. You're not here to appreciate the garden. You're here to work in it, to maintain it, to serve those who do get to enjoy it. The mistress arrives with her entourage. 2 slaves walk with her, one carrying a parasol to shade her from the sun, another carrying her sewing basket. She settles onto the cushion you arranged, snaps her fingers. Wine, now. You didn't bring the wine. That's another slave's responsibility. But that slave is delayed, probably caught up in some other demand, and the mistress doesn't care about logistics. She wants wine. You run back to the kitchen. Find the special wine she prefers. Mix it with water in the proper proportions, 3 parts water to 1 part wine. Pour it into a fine glass cup. Hurry back to the garden. By the time you arrive, you're out of breath. You present the cup, eyes down. She takes it without looking at you, without thanking you, without acknowledging your existence in any meaningful way. You stand there, waiting. Sometimes she wants you to stay in case she needs something else. Sometimes she waves you away dismissively. Today she waves you away, back to the kitchen, back to carrying, back to cleaning, back to the endless cycle of tasks that keep this household functioning. And here's what you're beginning to understand if you're new to slavery. This is not a particularly cruel household. The master doesn't beat slaves for entertainment. The mistress is demanding but not sadistic. The children are mostly indifferent rather than actively mean. By Roman standards, this is a decent situation. Some slaves have it much worse, but even in a good household, you are still a slave. You have no time to yourself, no moment of rest, no choice about what you do or when you do it. From before dawn until long after dark, you labor for the comfort of others. Your body aches. Your stomach growls with hunger. Your spirit, well, you're learning not to think too much about your spirit. Thinking about what you've lost, what you'll never have, makes the work harder. Better to just exist, move from task to task, survive the day, then the next, then the next. The sun is fully up now. The morning is well underway. Rome outside is alive with commerce and conversation. Free people are making choices about their day, deciding where to go, what to do, whom to see. And you're carrying water, lighting fires, serving food, being furniture in someone else's life. This is what morning looks like when you're a Roman slave, and the day has barely begun. Let's pause here for a moment while you catch your breath between tasks. Let's talk about something important. Not all slaves experience slavery in the same way. The word slave covered a vast spectrum of experiences, from the nearly comfortable to the absolutely hellish. Where you fell on that spectrum depended on factors often beyond your control: your education, your appearance, your gender, your skills, and most of all, sheer luck. If you found yourself as an urban house slave like you are in the scenario we've been imagining, you were actually among the more fortunate. The work was hard, yes. The hours were long, Absolutely. But you had a roof over your head. You ate regularly, even if the food wasn't abundant or particularly good. You weren't exposed to the elements. You might even develop specialized skills that gave you a certain amount of security. The cook who prepares meals the family loves. The hairdresser who knows exactly how the mistress prefers her coiffure. The pedagogue who teaches the children their Greek and mathematics. Urban slaves sometimes accumulated what was called peculiarma, small personal fund. Technically, everything a slave owned belonged to their master, but many masters allowed slaves to keep tips, small payments for services or gifts. Some slaves saved this money for decades, hoping to eventually purchase their freedom. Others used it to make their current lives slightly more bearable, buying better sandals, a warmer cloak, perhaps a small luxury like a ceramic lamp instead of darkness after sunset. House slaves also had proximity to power, which could be both an advantage and a danger. You heard conversations, you knew secrets. A clever slave could use this information to secure their position, to make themselves indispensable. But you also knew that being close to power meant being vulnerable to its whims. The master's bad mood could fall on you simply because you were nearby. The mistress's jealousy, perhaps she suspected her husband of inappropriate relations with a slave, could result in punishment even if you'd done nothing wrong. But compare this to the agricultural slaves working on the latifundia, the massive agricultural estates that fed the Roman Empire. These slaves had it exponentially worse. They worked in the fields from sunrise to sunset, performing backbreaking labor under the scorching sun or in pouring rain, planting, harvesting, tending animals, pressing olives, treading grapes. Their accommodations were often just sheds or barns. Their food was minimal, the absolute least the owner could provide while keeping them functional enough to work. Agricultural slaves rarely saw their owners. The estates were managed by overseers felici, who were themselves sometimes slaves or freedmen, and who drove the workers mercilessly to produce maximum yield. There was no possibility of developing a personal relationship with the master, no chance to demonstrate value beyond raw physical labor. You were a unit of production, nothing more. When you became too old or too injured to work effectively, you were discarded. Perhaps sold to an even worse situation. Perhaps simply turned out to die. And if you think that's as bad as it could get, consider the mine slaves. This was the fate that awaited the truly unfortunate, the truly despised, or those being punished. Roman mines extracting gold, silver, copper, iron, and especially the cinnabar used to make the red pigment so prized by wealthy Romans, were death sentences that just took a while to execute. Mine slaves worked in darkness, deep underground, in tunnels barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. The air was thick with dust that filled your lungs and eventually killed you. The work was extracting ore with primitive tools, your hands bleeding, your back bent in positions that left you permanently deformed. Many mine slaves were chained to prevent escape. Not that escape was really possible from deep underground. You worked until you died, which usually happened within a few years, sometimes within months. There was a silver mine in Spain, Las Medulas, where thousands of slaves toiled. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder described how slaves would dig tunnels into mountains, extract the ore, and then deliberately collapse the tunnels to break apart the rock. Many slaves died in these deliberate collapses, but ore was extracted, so the operation was considered successful. Then there were the gladiator slaves. We think of gladiators as glamorous, and some were the champions who survived many fights and became celebrities of sorts. But most gladiators were slaves forced into combat for entertainment, trained to kill or be killed, living in the ludus, the gladiator school, under constant guard. Fed well, yes, because a fit gladiator put on a better show, but knowing that every time you entered the arena, you might not leave it alive. The crowd would cheer. They'd place bets on whether you'd live or die, and if you fell wounded and bleeding, they would signal thumbs up or down, live or die, based on how entertaining your suffering had been. If you survived many fights, you might earn enough to buy your freedom eventually. But most gladiators died young, their bodies broken by combat, their blood soaking into the sand for the amusement of free citizens. And we must speak, though it's uncomfortable, about sexual slavery. This was perhaps the most psychologically devastating form of enslavement, and it was disturbingly common. Attractive slaves of any gender, but especially young women and boys, were vulnerable to sexual exploitation. In brothels, certainly. The lupanaria of Rome were full of enslaved prostitutes who had no choice in their work, no ability to refuse customers, no control over their own bodies. But sexual slavery existed in private homes too. Masters had absolute legal right to sexual access to their slaves. A slave woman could not refuse her master's advances. A slave man or boy could not refuse either. If you were attractive, young, and enslaved, you lived with the constant knowledge that your body was available for your owner's use. Children born from these coerced unions were born into slavery, more property for the master. Some masters took slave concubines, forming what looked like relationships, but were fundamentally coercive. The slave might receive better treatment, gifts, even affection of a sort, but the foundation was ownership, not love, and at any moment the master's interest could shift to someone else, leaving the former favorite vulnerable. Female slaves faced the additional burden of pregnancy and childbirth. If you became pregnant, whether through rape by your master, coerced relations with another slave, or even a genuine relationship with a fellow slave, that child belonged to your master. You might nurse your baby for a few months, then have the child taken away to work elsewhere or even sold. The pain of this, the trauma of bearing children only to lose them, was a specific cruelty inflicted on enslaved women throughout the Roman world. Child slaves deserve special mention because their suffering was particularly acute. Rome enslaved children captured in war, children born to enslaved mothers, children sold by desperate parents, children kidnapped by slave traders. A child as young as 6 or 7 might be put to work, fetching and carrying, serving at table, acting as personal attendants. Children were valued for certain types of work. They had small hands useful for delicate tasks. They were easier to control than adults. They could be trained from a young age to accept their status without rebellion. But they were also more vulnerable to abuse, more likely to die from the harsh conditions, more psychologically damaged by the trauma of enslavement. There were also the public slaves, servi publici, who belonged not to private owners but to the Roman state. They worked in temples, public buildings, aqueducts, sewers, and other civic infrastructure. Their situation varied wildly. Some public slaves held positions of significant responsibility, essentially acting as civil servants. Others did the dirty, dangerous work of maintaining the city's infrastructure, cleaning sewers, repairing aqueducts, hauling away waste. And then the truly skilled slaves, the doctors, teachers, accountants, architects, engineers. These slaves possessed education and expertise that was valuable and relatively rare. A slave doctor might treat wealthy patients, might even be sought after for their medical knowledge. A slave teacher might educate the children of multiple elite families. A slave accountant might manage the complex finances of a large household or business. These slaves often had better living conditions. They weren't beaten as readily because damaging their ability to perform skilled work was counterproductive. They might be allowed to move through the city with relative freedom. They might interact with free citizens almost as equals almost, but never quite, because at the end of the day they were still property. Their skills belonged to their owners. Their knowledge enriched their masters, and despite their education and expertise, they could be sold, punished, or killed at their owner's discretion. The bitter irony was that some slaves effectively ran businesses, managed estates, controlled significant resources, but owned nothing themselves. A slave villicus might oversee an agricultural estate employing hundreds of workers, free and enslaved. He might make daily decisions about planting and harvesting, buying and selling, hiring and firing. He might live in a comfortable house and eat well, but he was still a slave. His wife, if he had one, was likely a slave. His children were slaves. Everything he managed belonged to someone else. This hierarchy of suffering created tensions among slaves themselves. House slaves sometimes looked down on field slaves. Urban slaves felt superior to rural slaves. Skilled slaves might maintain distance from unskilled laborers. Those born in Rome felt themselves above foreigners. This division, this stratification, served the masters well. Slaves focused on their slight advantages over other slaves were less likely to unite against the system that enslaved them all. But whether you were a house slave or a field slave, a mine worker or a gladiator, a skilled professional or an untrained laborer, one thing remained constant. You were not free. You owned nothing, not even yourself. You had no legal rights, no protection, no guaranteed future. Your life was worth exactly what someone was willing to pay for you, and that value could disappear in an instant. Understanding this hierarchy helps us grasp the full scope of Roman slavery. It wasn't monolithic. It was a complex system that touched every aspect of Roman society, that enslaved millions in countless different roles, that created a vast spectrum of suffering, from the barely tolerable to the absolutely unendurable. And all of it, every single variation of it, was fundamentally wrong, fundamentally inhumane. A system built on the premise that some people could own other people, could control their bodies, their time, their very existence. This was the world you navigated as a slave. This was the hierarchy you existed within. And wherever you fell within it, you shared one truth with all the others. You were not free. The sun is directly overhead now. It's the 6th hour of the day, what we would call noon. The heat is becoming oppressive. If it's summer in Rome, the temperature might reach 90 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. The sun beats down on the city's stone buildings, on its paved streets, on its tile roofs, and all that stone and tile radiates heat back upward. Rome becomes an oven. If you're a house slave, You're at least indoors, though indoors doesn't mean cool. Roman houses were designed to manage heat to some degree. Thick walls. The atrium opened to the sky to allow hot air to rise. Sometimes the compluvium arranged to catch any breeze. But the kitchen where you've been working all morning is unbearably hot. The cooking fires have been burning for hours now. The heat is suffocating. Sweat pours down your face, your back, soaks through your tunic. You're preparing the family's midday meal. For wealthy Romans, this is usually a light meal, the cena. The main dinner comes later in the day. But light is relative. You're preparing cold meats, cheese, bread, perhaps a salad of lettuce and herbs dressed with vinegar and oil. Fruit figs if they're in season, grapes, apples. Wine, of course, properly mixed with water. Your own hunger is becoming difficult to ignore. You had that small breakfast leftover bread, remember? But that was hours ago. The physical labor of the morning has burned through whatever energy that meager meal provided. Your stomach is cramping. Your head feels light. You've learned to work through this feeling, but it never becomes easy. It's always there, this gnawing emptiness, this reminder that your body's needs are secondary to your duties. The cook, seeing you sway slightly as you move past the oven, grunts and tears off a piece of bread from a loaf meant for the family. He hands it to you wordlessly. You take it, grateful, and eat it quickly, barely tasting it, just filling the emptiness a little. He turns back to his work without acknowledgement. This small kindness, and it is a kindness relative to how things could be, is as much as you can hope for. But if you're not a house slave, if you're one of the thousands of slaves working outside on a day like this, then the heat is your enemy in a much more immediate way. If you're a litter bearer, you're carrying your master through the streets in the full glare of the sun. Roman litters lecticae were essentially portable couches carried by 4 to 8 slaves, depending on the size and the master's weight. Your master reclines comfortably inside, shaded by curtains, perhaps being fanned by another slave walking alongside. You're carrying him through the forum, up the hills of Rome, your shoulders burning with the strain, sweat pouring into your eyes, blurring your vision. You must keep pace with the other bearers. If one stumbles, all of you are punished. Your feet hurt. The streets are paved with stone, uneven, and your sandals provide minimal cushioning. The weight on your shoulders, your master easily weighs 180 pounds, plus the weight of the litter itself is crushing. Your muscles scream, but you cannot stop, cannot slow down, cannot show weakness. The master is going to the baths or to the forum to conduct business or to visit a friend. He's discussing important matters with another citizen walking alongside the litter. They're talking about politics, about the games, about some business deal. They're not thinking about you at all. You're just transportation, furniture that moves. When you finally arrive at the destination and set the litter down, your shoulders are bruised. Your back feels like it might break. You'll wait here probably for hours until the master is ready to be carried home again. There's no shade where slaves wait. You'll stand in the sun or crouch in whatever shadow you can find, drinking from the public fountain if you're allowed, waiting. Or perhaps you're a merchant's slave, standing in a shop in the forum. You've been standing since early morning standing, because sitting would appear lazy, would suggest inattention. You're selling goods for your master, fabric, perhaps, or pottery, or imported spices. Customers come and go. You must be polite to all of them, deferential, answering questions, praising the merchandise. negotiating prices within the limits your master has set. The shop has no real walls, just a counter open to the street. The sun moves across the sky, and you move with it, trying to stay in whatever small shadow the awning provides. Your feet are swelling. Standing for hours does that. Your legs ache. But sitting is not permitted. The master or his overseer could appear at any moment, and if you're caught sitting, there will be consequences. Free customers treat you with varying degrees of courtesy. Some are polite, speaking to you as if you're almost human. Others are curt, dismissive, ordering you around, complaining about prices as if you set them. Some try to cheat you, knowing that if the money doesn't add up at day's end, you're the one who'll be punished. You must be constantly vigilant, constantly calculating, constantly aware. A wealthy woman stops at the shop. She's interested in some purple fabric, expensive, dyed with the precious murex shells. She fingers the cloth critically. Is this genuine Tyrian purple? She demands. You assure her it is. She's skeptical. She negotiates aggressively. You hold firm on the price. Your master would be furious if you sold it too cheap, but respectfully, because angering a customer could mean losing the sale. Finally, she agrees. You calculate the cost, accept her payment, carefully wrap the fabric. She leaves without a word of thanks. You're not a person to her. You're part of the shop, like the counter or the shelves, and you're so thirsty. The heat, the standing, the constant talking, your throat is dry as dust. There's a fountain nearby, but you can't leave the shop unattended. Theft is common, and you're responsible for the merchandise. So you wait, throat burning, lips cracking, until another of your master's slaves arrives to briefly relieve you. You actually run to the fountain. Cup your hands, drink deeply. The water is tepid, but it's water. You drink until your stomach hurts, knowing it might be hours before you can drink again. Then back to the shop, back to standing, back to waiting. If you're working in the fields on a day like this, you have it even worse. The agricultural slaves are out in full sun, no shade anywhere. You're harvesting wheat, the sharp stalks cutting your hands, the chaff irritating your eyes and throat. You're bent over for hours, back screaming in protest, cutting and gathering and binding. The overseer rides a horse, watching, occasionally cracking a whip in the air as motivation. Not hitting anyone yet, but the threat is constant. You've been working since dawn with one brief rest. You were given bread and water barely enough and then back to work. The sun is merciless. Some of the older slaves are struggling. You can see them moving more slowly, faltering. You want to help them, but you can't. Helping others means falling behind on your own work, and falling behind means punishment. One of the older women collapses, just collapses, falls into the wheat, unconscious. The overseer rides over, looks down at her impassively. He signals to two other slaves to drag her to the shade, what little shade exists at the field's edge. No water for her yet, no rest. She'll revive or she won't. In the meantime, everyone else keeps working. The message is clear. Weakness is not tolerated. You keep cutting wheat, keep binding sheaves. Your hands are bleeding now, small cuts from the sharp stalks, but they sting with sweat and dirt. Your head pounds. The sun seems to be actively pushing you down, pressing you into the earth. You're dizzy, but you keep working, because stopping is not an option. By the time the workday pauses, just pauses, not ends for a brief midday rest, you can barely stand upright. You straighten your back and something pops. Not painfully, but concerningly. You stagger to where water is being distributed. 1 cup. 1 single cup of water after hours of labor in the sun. You drink it too fast, cough, wish desperately for more. There is no more. You're given a piece of hard bread. You gnaw on it, your jaw sore from unconsciously clenching it all morning. The bread is barely edible, dry and gritty, but it's food. You eat every crumb. The rest period is perhaps 15 minutes. You find a spot in the shade, though shade is generous. It's more like slightly less direct sun, and you sit. Your body sags with relief at not standing, not bending, not moving. Around you, other slaves do the same. Nobody talks much. Everyone is too tired, too hot, too depleted. You close your eyes just for a moment. The exhaustion is so profound that you could sleep right here, sitting up in the middle of a field. You could sleep for days. You could. The overseer's whistle blows. Breaks over, back to work. You drag yourself to your feet. Every muscle protests. You return to the wheat, to the cutting, to the heat. The sun is still high. There are hours of work left before sunset. Hours and hours and hours. This is midday for a slave. The heat is not just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. Dehydration kills. Heat stroke kills. Exhaustion kills. But the work doesn't stop, cannot stop, because the grain must be harvested, the master must be carried, the shop must remain open, the household must be served. And your hunger, your thirst, your pain, these are irrelevant. These are just the background noise of being a slave. You push through it, because what else can you do? You push through it and hope you survive until evening, when perhaps there will be food, water, rest. Perhaps. Let's talk about fear. Real fear. The kind that lives in your stomach, that walks with you through every moment, that influences every decision you make. Because as a slave in Rome, fear is your constant companion. Fear of making mistakes. Fear of displeasing your master. Fear of punishment. Roman law was very clear on this point. A master could punish a slave however he saw fit, short of killing them, and even that prohibition was often ignored with minimal consequences. Your body did not belong to you. It belonged to your owner, and they could do with it what they wished. The most common punishment was beating. Simple, effective, requiring no special tools or preparation. A slave who moved too slowly, who broke something, who spoke out of turn, who failed to complete a task to satisfaction, any of these could earn a beating. The instrument varied. Sometimes just a hand slapping face or head. Sometimes a rod of fustuarium they called the bundle of wooden rods used for beating. Sometimes a belt. Sometimes whatever happened to be handy. If you were a house slave, you might be beaten in front of the rest of the household staff as an example, made to stand in the atrium while the master or his overseer struck you repeatedly. Other slaves forced to watch, learning the lesson. This is what happens when you fail. This could be you. You learn to take the beating without crying out. Showing pain made it worse, gave your punisher satisfaction. You learned to go somewhere else in your mind while the blows fell, to dissociate from your body, to survive it. The marks lasted for days. Bruises covered your arms, your back, your legs. Every movement hurt. But you still had to work. The beating didn't buy you rest time. It just made the work more painful. For more serious infractions, there was the flagellum, the whip. This wasn't a simple strip of leather. This was a weapon designed to cause maximum pain and damage. Multiple leather strips attached to a wooden handle, sometimes with pieces of metal or bone attached to the ends. When used on bare skin, it tore the flesh, left permanent scars, could cause serious injury, even death if the beating was severe enough. Slaves who tried to escape and were caught received the flagellum as standard punishment. You would be stripped and tied to a post, then whipped, sometimes dozens of lashes, while other slaves were gathered to watch. The psychological impact was as important as the physical. See what happens to runaways? See what happens when you dream of freedom. This is the cost of that dream. After being whipped, you might be branded. A heated iron pressed to your forehead or cheek, burning a mark into your flesh that identified you permanently as a fugitivus, a runaway. This mark would follow you for life. Even if you were eventually freed, people would see it and know what you had done. Know that you had been desperate enough to run. Know that you had been caught. Some masters, not satisfied with simple branding, would brand actual words into slaves' foreheads. "I am a runaway," burned into the skin in Latin letters. The physical pain of this was excruciating. The shame lasted forever. Then there was being sent to the mill in pastrinum. This was a punishment for slaves whose masters wanted them to suffer, but didn't want to permanently damage valuable property. You would be rented out to work in one of the grain mills that dotted the city. These mills were hot, dark, loud places where slaves and sometimes animals turned huge stone wheels that ground grain into flour. The work was brutal, pushing the wheel around and around, hour after hour, breathing in flour dust that filled your lungs. Many slaves sent to the mills developed respiratory diseases that killed them eventually. But at least mill work would end eventually, assuming your master decided to take you back. Some punishments were permanent and fatal. Crucifixion was reserved for the most serious crimes: murder of a master, participation in rebellion, aggravated escape attempts. If you killed your master, Roman law required that every slave in the household be crucified, every single one. Even slaves who had nothing to do with the murder, even children. The logic was that slaves had an obligation to protect their masters, and failure to prevent a murder was itself a crime worthy of death. The actual process of crucifixion was designed to be as painful and humiliating as possible. You would be beaten first, often severely, then forced to carry the horizontal beam of your cross through the streets to the execution site. Stripped naked, nailed to the wood through your wrists and feet, or sometimes tied, which actually prolonged the suffering, then hoisted up and left to die. Death from crucifixion took hours, sometimes days. You died slowly from a combination of shock, dehydration, and asphyxiation. The position of your body made it difficult to breathe, and eventually you couldn't draw breath at all. Birds might start pecking at you while you still lived. The Romans left crucified bodies on display for days afterward as warnings. After the Spartacus rebellion, remember, 6,000 captured slaves were crucified along the Appian Way, 6,000 crosses stretching for over 100 miles. The bodies were left to rot as a message to every slave in Rome. Rebellion leads here. Dreams of freedom lead here. This is what awaits you if you resist. But punishment wasn't always so dramatic. Sometimes it was quieter, more insidious. A slave who displeased their master might be sold. separated from family, from friends, from any small comfort or familiarity they'd managed to build. Sold to someone whose reputation was worse. Sold to work in the fields when you'd been a house slave. Sold to the mines. Sold away from your children or your spouse or your parents. This threat hung over every slave constantly. No matter how long you'd served in a household, no matter how skilled you were, no matter what relationships you'd formed, you could be sold at any moment. You owned nothing, not even your connections to other people. Some punishments were specifically designed to humiliate. The furqa was a wooden fork placed around a slave's neck and shoulders, with their hands tied to the fork's ends. You would be forced to walk through public streets this way, a sign hung around your neck advertising your crime. I am a thief, or I am lazy, or I am disobedient. Passers-by would jeer at you, sometimes throw things. The humiliation was part of the punishment, breaking your spirit as much as any physical beating. For domestic slaves, particularly women, there were punishments that don't leave marks but leave scars nonetheless. Forced to eat separately from other slaves. Denied the small privileges that made life bearable. Given the worst, most degrading tasks. Subjected to verbal abuse that wore away at your sense of self. Sexual assault used as punishment, as demonstration of power, as reminder of your absolute lack of bodily autonomy. And here's something crucial to understand. Even in households with kind masters, the threat of punishment shaped everything. You might have a master who rarely beat his slaves, who prided himself on his temperance and self-control, but you knew he could. That knowledge influenced every interaction, every decision, every moment of every day. You performed perfect obedience, not out of respect or loyalty, but out of fear, because at any moment that kindness could evaporate. At any moment the master's mood could shift. At any moment you could find yourself on the receiving end of violence. The psychological impact of this constant threat cannot be overstated. Modern psychology recognizes this as trauma living under constant threat of violence, with no control over your environment, no way to predict when punishment might come. Some slaves developed what we'd now call learned helplessness. They stopped trying to avoid punishment because punishment seemed random and unavoidable. They became passive, submissive, broken. Others became hypervigilant, watching their masters constantly for signs of mood change, trying to anticipate needs before they were spoken, managing everyone around them to prevent situations that might lead to punishment. This hypervigilance was exhausting, but it sometimes meant survival. Some slaves internalized the system entirely, becoming enforcers themselves if they were placed in positions of authority over other slaves. The villicus who beat field slaves to increase productivity. The senior house slave who reported younger slaves' infractions to curry favor with the master. The system perpetuated itself through fear, and sometimes through slaves turning on each other. Watching other slaves being punished was part of the system too. Masters made examples. When one slave was beaten, others were often forced to watch. The message was clear and universal. This is what happens when you fail. This is what happens when you disobey. This is what happens when you forget your place. And the cruelest part, some masters genuinely didn't see themselves as cruel. They beat their slaves the way you might discipline a dog, not out of malice, but out of a belief that this was necessary and proper. They would whip a slave for incompetence in the morning and feel no guilt about it by evening. The slave was property, Disciplining property was not only their right, but their responsibility. Roman philosophers wrote about the proper treatment of slaves. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, wrote that masters should not be cruel, that slaves were human beings deserving of a certain baseline respect. But even Seneca didn't question the institution of slavery itself. He still owned slaves. He just advocated treating them slightly better than one might treat livestock. This was the reality of power in ancient Rome. Absolute power, unchecked power, power that could destroy you on a whim, and there was no appeal, no court to take your case to, no authority that would intervene on your behalf. If your master decided to beat you, to brand you, to sell you, to kill you, that was their right. You learned to live with this fear. You had no choice. It became part of you, changed how you moved through the world, how you spoke, how you thought. You learned to make yourself small, to be invisible, to anticipate needs, to never give offense. You learned to survive. But survival under constant threat of violence is not really living. It's enduring. It's existing in a state of perpetual stress, perpetual fear, perpetual awareness that your safety depends entirely on the whims of someone who sees you as fundamentally less than human. This was the weight that Roman slaves carried, heavier than any physical burden. The knowledge that punishment could come at any moment, for any reason or no reason at all, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing, you could do about it. The afternoon sun is beginning its slow descent toward evening, but the heat hasn't broken yet. If anything, the accumulated warmth of the day has made the city even hotter. The stones radiate heat, the air shimmers, and you're being sent on an errand. Your master needs something from the forum, a message delivered to a business associate, perhaps, or he's expecting a shipment of goods that needs to be collected, or the mistress wants a particular type of fabric that's only sold by one merchant across the city. Regardless, you're being sent out into the streets of Rome, alone, without protection, with nothing but your slave collar identifying you as property. Walking through Rome as a slave is a very different experience than walking through Rome as a citizen. Citizens move with confidence, with purpose, with the knowledge that they belong here, that this city is theirs. Slaves move carefully, always aware of their vulnerability, always conscious that they have no rights, no protection, no recourse if something goes wrong. The streets are crowded at this hour, merchants selling from carts and temporary stalls, citizens conducting business, visiting the baths, meeting friends, street performers entertaining for coins, beggars pleading for charity, wagons rumbling past, though heavy carts are usually restricted to nighttime hours. There's always traffic, children running and playing, dogs scavenging for scraps. Rome is alive with activity, with commerce, with the chaos of urban life. You navigate through this carefully. Keep your head down, your eyes averted. Don't make eye contact with free citizens unless absolutely necessary. Don't draw attention to yourself. You're carrying a message or money or goods, and you're responsible for these things. If you're robbed, if you lose what you're carrying, the consequences will fall on you, not on the thieves. The streets themselves are challenging to navigate. Some areas have proper paving stones, polygonal blocks fitted together, worn smooth by countless feet and wheels. Other areas are muddy or covered in whatever refuse has been thrown into the street. Romans don't have organized trash collection. Waste gets tossed out windows, dumped in streets, left to accumulate. You step carefully, avoiding the worst of it. The buildings loom over narrow streets, blocking much of the light. Rome is crowded, over 1 million people packed into a relatively small area. The insulae apartment buildings rise 4, 5, sometimes 6 stories high. Dangerous structures, poorly built, prone to collapse and fire. You hear the sounds of life from the windows above. Babies crying, people arguing, someone practicing a musical instrument badly. Cooking smells, bodily smells, all the odors of humanity living in close quarters. You pass a public fountain, and you're tempted to stop for a drink. But your master didn't give you permission to stop, and if someone sees you dawdling, if word gets back, there could be punishment. So you keep walking, throat dry, telling yourself you'll drink when you get back. A group of young men, teenagers really, from wealthy families judging by their clean togas, are loitering near a shop. They see you approaching, see your collar. Their eyes light up with the particular cruelty that bored young men with power sometimes display. Hey, slave, come here. You have to obey. They're free citizens. You're not. You approach them, keeping your expression neutral, trying not to show fear even though your heart is racing. Who's your master? You tell them. They laugh. One of them recognizes the name, makes a crude joke about your master's business dealings. You stand silently. Laughing would be disrespectful to your master. Not laughing might offend these young men. There's no right answer, so you stand quietly and hope they lose interest. What are you carrying? You're carrying money coins in a small leather pouch, payment for goods you're supposed to collect. You show them the pouch. One of them snatches it, tosses it to his friend. They're playing with it, amused by your obvious distress. Maybe we should keep this. What would your master do then? Beat you? They're laughing. You keep your voice steady. Please, Domine, I'm on an errand for my master. He needs this payment delivered. They toss the pouch a few more times, enjoying your fear. Finally, one of them throws it back to you, hard enough that you fumble catching it. They laugh more at your clumsiness and move on, looking for other entertainment. You stand there for a moment, heart pounding, clutching the pouch. This is the reality of moving through Rome as a slave. You're vulnerable to anyone's whims. Anyone can harass you, rob you, hurt you, and there's no one to complain to. No authority that cares. You're just a slave. You continue to the Forum, shaken but functional. The Forum is the heart of Rome, the political, commercial, social center. It's magnificent, you have to admit, even in your circumstances. The great temples gleaming white. The basilicas where legal and business matters are conducted. The rostra where speakers address crowds. The monuments and statues commemorating Rome's glory. And everywhere people. Citizens in togas conducting business. Senators and magistrates moving importantly through crowds. Merchants selling from stalls. Lawyers shouting arguments. Politicians giving speeches. And everywhere among them, slaves. Carrying messages, hauling goods, attending their masters, conducting business on behalf of their owners. You find the merchant your master sent you to. Show him the message you carried written on a wax tablet, sealed with your master's seal. The merchant reads it, nods, disappears into his storeroom, returns with the goods your master purchased. Heavy amphorae ceramic jars filled with olive oil. You pay him with the coins from your pouch, and he gives you a receipt, another wax tablet, that you must return to your master to prove the transaction occurred honestly. Now you have to carry these amphorae back across the city. They're heavy, each one weighs perhaps 30 pounds when full. You're carrying two, one in each arm, trying to balance the weight. Your arms are already tired from the day's work, and now this. The journey back seems longer than the journey here. Your shoulders burn, your hands cramp. You have to stop periodically to rest, setting the jars down carefully so they don't break. You pass a public slave auction on your way back. Can't help but look, even though it hurts. Men, women, children standing on the platform, being examined and sold. You remember when that was you. Remember the terror, the humiliation, the desperate unreality of it. Some of the slaves being sold look numb. Some are crying. Some have a wild look in their eyes, like trapped animals. A little boy, maybe 8 years old, is being sold. His mother is there too, being sold separately. You can hear her pleading with potential buyers. Please, buy us together. He's a good boy. We can both work. Please don't separate us. But buyers are calculating. A woman and a child cost more than just one or the other. Most are only interested in the woman. She's young, strong, capable of years of labor. The boy sells first. To a merchant who needs help in his workshop, the mother screams, reaches for her child. The auctioneer's assistants hold her back. The boy is crying, calling for his mother. The merchant who bought him drags him away, indifferent to the child's distress. The mother collapses, sobbing. She'll be sold next, probably to someone different, and she'll never see her son again. You watch this, and something inside you hardens. Or maybe breaks. It's hard to tell the difference anymore. You turn away and keep walking. You have to. You have your own survival to worry about, your own burdens to carry. You can't save that woman or her child. You can't save anyone, least of all yourself. The afternoon traffic is getting heavier. Workers finishing their day's labor, heading to the baths or home. Street vendors calling out their wares, trying to sell the last of their goods before sunset. You weave through the crowds, protecting your amphorae, hyper-aware of pickpockets and thieves. If these jars break or are stolen, you'll be the one blamed, the one punished. You pass a group of slaves being led in chains through the streets. New arrivals, probably. Fresh from the docks or the markets outside the city. They're chained together by their necks, stumbling along behind the slave dealer's cart. They look terrified, exhausted. Some have been beaten. You can see bruises, blood. One woman has clearly been crying for hours. Her face is swollen and blotchy. This could have been you. This was you once. You look away quickly, before you see too much, before you remember too much. The memories are too painful. Better to focus on the present, on survival, on getting these jars back to your master without incident. You finally arrive back at the house as the sun is starting to lower toward the horizon. Your arms are shaking with exhaustion. You can barely feel your hands anymore. But you've completed your task. You've delivered the message, collected the goods, brought them home safely. You present the receipt to your master's steward, the slave who manages the household on the master's behalf. He examines the tablet, nods curtly. Put the oil in the storeroom, then go help in the kitchen. The evening meal needs preparation. No praise. No acknowledgement of the difficulty of what you just did. No recognition that you navigated the dangerous streets of Rome, dealt with harassment, carried heavy loads across the city. This is simply what's expected. This is what slaves do. You carry the amphorae to the storeroom. your arms trembling. Set them down carefully in their designated spots. And then, without pause, without rest, you head to the kitchen to begin your next set of tasks. The afternoon has passed this way, in labor, in vulnerability, in the constant awareness of your powerlessness. You've been sent out into a world that sees you as less than human, that allows anyone to harass or exploit you, that offers no protection or recourse. You've witnessed the suffering of others and been unable to help. You've carried burdens, physical and emotional. You've survived another afternoon, and now the evening approaches, bringing with it more work, more demands, more hours of service, before you can collapse into sleep and do it all again tomorrow. The sun is setting now, painting the Roman sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. It's beautiful, the kind of sunset that free citizens might pause to admire, might point out to companions, might write poetry about. You catch a glimpse of it through the peristyle, the columned courtyard, as you hurry past with an armload of linens. You don't have time to appreciate its beauty. The evening is your busiest time. The family's center, the main meal of the day, is being prepared. In wealthy households, this is not a simple affair. This is an elaborate production involving multiple courses, careful presentation, specific rituals and customs. And slaves make it all happen. The kitchen is chaos. The cook is barking orders. Multiple dishes are being prepared simultaneously. There's the gustachio, the appetizer course, featuring eggs, vegetables, perhaps some shellfish or small fish. Then the prima mensa, the main course, with multiple meat dishes, fish, vegetables, bread. And finally the secunda mensa dessert with fruits, nuts, cake sweetened with honey. All of this must be prepared fresh, presented beautifully, served at exactly the right temperature. You're assigned to serving tonight. This means you'll be in the triclinium, the dining room, for the next several hours, standing at attention, waiting on the family and any guests they might have. You've changed into a clean tunic for this. Appearance matters when serving. You must look presentable, clean, neat. Never mind that you've been working since before dawn and you're exhausted. Never mind that your feet are aching and your back is sore. You must look fresh, attentive, ready to serve. The family begins arriving in the triclinium. The master first, accompanied by his oldest son. They're discussing some business matter, barely acknowledging your presence as they recline on the couches arranged around the central table. The mistress arrives next, with her daughter and the daughter's personal slave in attendance. They arrange themselves on their designated couches, adjusting cushions, settling in. Tonight there are guests, a business associate of the master's and his wife. They arrive fashionably late, are greeted warmly, offered the best couch with the best view of the room. This means an even more elaborate meal, more courses, more wine, more opportunities for mistakes that could earn punishment. You stand against the wall with 3 other serving slaves, waiting for the first signal. The master's cup is empty. He raises it slightly, not even looking at you. You move immediately, smoothly, lifting the wine jug, wine pre-mixed with water at the proper 3-to-1 ratio, and filling his cup, not too full, not too little, just right. You step back, return to your position. The gustachio is brought out. You and the other servers move in practiced coordination, placing small plates before each diner, boiled eggs with spicy sauce, olives marinated in herbs, small fried fish, lettuce salad dressed with vinegar. Each plate is arranged artfully. Presentation matters. as much as taste in a Roman dinner. The diners begin eating, still talking. Business and politics mostly. The master is explaining some complicated financial arrangement. His guest is asking probing questions. They eat absently, barely tasting the food, focused on their conversation. The women are discussing the latest fashions, some scandal involving a senator's wife, the upcoming games at the Colosseum. You stand and wait. Your job is to anticipate needs. When a cup is half empty, refill it. When a plate is finished, remove it. When someone drops something, clean it immediately. All of this must happen smoothly, invisibly. Your furniture that moves, nothing more. The master snaps his fingers, gestures at his plate. You move forward, remove it, return to your position. The mistress wants more olives. You bring them. The guest's wife needs her hands washed. Servants bring a basin of water and a towel, and she dips her fingers, washing away the grease from the food. You take the basin away. The prima mensa arrives. This is the centerpiece of the meal. The cook has outdone himself tonight. Roasted pork glazed with honey, whole fish baked in herbs, dormice stuffed with nuts, a Roman delicacy, chicken cooked in wine sauce, vegetables prepared in different styles. The platters are heavy. You and another slave carry one together, setting it carefully on the table. The diners exclaim in appreciation at the food, not at you. Never at you. As they eat, they grow more animated. The wine is flowing freely now, and Romans take their wine seriously. You're refilling cups constantly. The conversation is getting louder, more energetic. They're laughing at jokes, arguing about politics, gossiping about mutual acquaintances. Hours pass this way. You're still standing. Your feet are going numb. Your legs are trembling with fatigue, but you cannot sit, cannot lean, cannot show any sign of tiredness. You stand at attention, alert, ready to move when called. The master calls for entertainment. Musicians are brought in. Slave musicians, of course. A lyre player and a flute player take positions in the corner and begin playing soft, elegant music. The diners pause to listen, appreciatively. The master prides himself on his cultured taste. The musicians are good, well-trained, talented. They're also exhausted, having worked all day at other tasks before being required to perform tonight. But they play beautifully, because the alternative is punishment. The secunda mensa is served. Fruit scrapes, figs, dates, apples, honey cakes, nuts, walnuts, almonds, sweet wine, undiluted this time, to accompany the desserts. The diners are getting quite drunk now. Their faces are flushed. Their voices are loud. They're sprawled on their couches in poses of complete relaxation. And you're still standing, still serving, still being invisible furniture. The guest tells a joke. Everyone laughs. The master responds with his own joke. This one cruder. More laughter. The mistress looks slightly scandalized but amused. The men are getting into territory that would be inappropriate in mixed company, except that slaves don't count as real company. You hear everything, of course. You're standing right there, but you're expected to show no reaction, to pretend you haven't heard, to maintain a blank, neutral expression. Someone spills wine. It spreads across the expensive tablecloth, dripping onto the floor. You move immediately, bringing cloths to absorb the spill, cleaning it up while the diners barely pause in their conversation. As you're crouched on the floor, cleaning, the master's foot comes down near your hand. He doesn't notice you there, doesn't look down. You're invisible to him, even when you're inches from his body. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, the dinner is winding down. The guests are preparing to leave. Slaves bring their outer garments, togas for the men, palas for the women. Help them arrange the fabric properly. The guests say their farewells, praising the meal, promising to reciprocate the invitation soon, and then they're gone. The family disperses to their private chambers, and you finally get to begin cleaning up. The triclinium is a disaster. Food spilled on couches, on the floor, cups and plates scattered everywhere. The tablecloth is stained with wine and oil and various foods. You and the other servers begin the cleanup, moving efficiently despite your exhaustion. You carry load after load of dishes to the kitchen. The water for washing is cold. Now, nobody bothered to keep it heated because slaves don't deserve hot water. You plunge your hands into the cold water, scrubbing dishes with sand and a rough cloth. Your hands are already chapped and raw. The cold water and abrasive sand make them worse. But the dishes must be cleaned, dried, put away properly. While you're washing dishes, other slaves are cleaning the dining room, scrubbing the floor, wiping down the couches, changing the tablecloth, sweeping, making everything pristine for tomorrow, when it will all happen again. It's fully dark now, hours past sunset. You've been working for, you've lost count. 16 hours, 18? Your body is beyond fatigue. You're operating on some kind of autopilot muscle memory carrying you through tasks because your mind is too tired to think. But you're not done yet. The family's bedchambers must be prepared. The fires in their braziers must be banked for the night. Their sleeping clothes must be laid out. Their beds must be made perfect linens, smooth, pillows arranged just so, everything ready for their comfort. You drag yourself to the master's chamber. The body slave who personally attends him is already there, has already helped him undress and put on his sleeping tunic. But you're responsible for the room itself. You check the brazier, add a bit of charcoal to keep it glowing warmly through the night. You pick up the master's discarded daytime clothes, his toga, his tunic, and fold them carefully for cleaning tomorrow. You make sure the chamber pot is empty and clean. You adjust the window shutters to the position the master prefers. He's already in bed, reclining against the pillows. He doesn't look at you, doesn't acknowledge your presence. You're just part of the room, like the furniture. You back out quietly, closing the door softly behind you. Move to the next room, the mistress's chamber, and repeat the process. Then the children's rooms. Each one must be perfect. By the time you finish, it's late. Very late. The house is quiet now. The family is asleep. But the slaves are still moving through the corridors, finishing the last tasks of the day. Banking fires, checking locks, making sure everything is secure for the night. Finally, you're released to go to the slave quarters. You descend the stairs on legs that barely support you. The slave quarters are dark, most of the others already asleep. You find your sleeping space, collapse onto it. Don't even bother taking off your sandals. Just collapse. Your body is screaming. Every muscle hurts. Your feet are swollen. Your back feels like it might never straighten properly again. Your hands are raw. Your head is pounding. Your stomach is cramping with hunger. You managed to sneak a few bites during dinner cleanup, but it wasn't nearly enough. But you made it. You survived another day. Tomorrow you'll do it all again. And the day after. And the day after that. As you lie there in the darkness, listening to the breathing and snoring of other slaves around you, you try not to think too much. Thinking is dangerous. Thinking about your old life, if you had one. Thinking about freedom. Thinking about dignity, choice, autonomy, all the things you've lost. Better to just sleep, to let the darkness take you. To rest your broken body so it can break again tomorrow. Someone nearby is crying softly. Someone else is coughing, that same wet cough you heard this morning. Someone is muttering in their sleep, perhaps dreaming. You close your eyes and try to join them in oblivion. Sleep, when it comes, is not restful. It's just unconsciousness. A temporary escape from the grinding reality of your existence. But it's all you have, so you take it. Tomorrow the wheel starts turning again, before dawn, in the cold and darkness. And you rise and do it all again. This is evening for a slave. Not relaxation, not leisure, not rest, just more work extending deep into the night, until finally your body simply cannot continue and you collapse into a sleep that's more like death's cousin than actual rest. And when you wake, it begins again. The darkness in the slave quarters is complete now. No moonlight reaches down here. No starlight. Just darkness, thick and heavy, pressing down on you like a physical weight. You're lying on your thin sleeping mat, your body finally still after the endless hours of movement. But your mind won't stop. The stone floor beneath you is hard and cold. You can feel it through the mat, through your thin blanket. The cold seeps into your bones, but you're almost too tired to shiver. Your body has moved beyond simple cold into a state of near numbness. Everything hurts, your muscles, your joints, your skin, but it's a distant hurt now, an ache that's become so constant you've almost stopped noticing it. Almost. Around you in the darkness, the other slaves are in various states of rest. Some are already deeply asleep, exhausted beyond dreams. Their breathing is heavy, rhythmic. Some snore rough sounds that echo off the stone walls. Some twitch and mutter, their bodies reliving the day's labor, even in sleep. And some, like you, are still awake despite the exhaustion, still thinking. That's the curse of consciousness, isn't it? Your body begs for rest, but your mind refuses to quiet. Thoughts circle like vultures, picking at the carcass of your former life, your current reality, your uncertain future. You think about the person you were before. If there was a before, if you're old enough to remember freedom, you think about it now. What did your old life look like? Did you have a home? A family who loved you? A trade or craft you were skilled at? Maybe you were a farmer, working your own land. Maybe you were a merchant, conducting business in your own name. Maybe you were a scholar, free to read and learn and think. All of that is gone now. That person you were, they don't exist anymore. They died the moment you became property. Or maybe they didn't die. Maybe they're trapped inside you, screaming silently, beating against the cage of your circumstances. You're not sure which is worse. If you were born into slavery, your thoughts are different, but no less painful. You never knew freedom, so you don't miss it exactly. But you know it exists. You see it every day in the faces of free people, in the way they move through the world with confidence, with choice. You know that somewhere beyond these walls, people are living lives of their own design. And you wonder, what would that feel like? To choose where you go, what you do, who you love. Love, that's a dangerous thing to think about when you're a slave. But you think about it anyway. Maybe there's someone else in this household, another slave whose eyes you catch sometimes, who smiles at you when no one's looking. Maybe you've developed feelings for them, real feelings that have nothing to do with your shared circumstances and everything to do with their kindness, their strength, their humanity. But even love is complicated when you're enslaved. You can't marry, not really. Slaves can form relationships, can even be considered married in a social sense, contubernium. They call it a tent partnership, but it has no legal standing. Your master could sell either of you away at any moment, could separate you permanently with no more thought than separating two horses. And if you have children together, those children are born into slavery, born as property. You've brought new life into this world, only to condemn it to the same suffering you endure. Is that love, or is it cruelty? Some slaves have children with their masters forced, coerced, sometimes forming something that looks like affection, but is built on a foundation of ownership. Those children are still slaves, still property, even if their father is the master of the household. The system is absolute in its cruelty. You think about escape. Every slave thinks about escape. It plays out in your mind like a fantasy, like a story you tell yourself. You could run, just run, steal some supplies, walk out one night when everyone's asleep, and keep walking until you're far from Rome, far from anyone who knows your master's name. Find some small village where no one asks questions. Live free, even if you have to live poor. But reality intrudes on the fantasy quickly. Where would you go? How would you survive? You have no money, no contacts, no resources. You don't know the roads, don't know which towns are safe. And your collar, that damned collar around your neck, it identifies you as property. Anyone who sees it would know you're a runaway. And the reward for returning escaped slaves is significant enough that most people wouldn't hesitate to turn you in. Even if you got the collar off somehow, you'd still be marked. The way you speak, the way you move, the scars on your body from years of labor and punishment, all of it identifies you as a slave. Rome is a society built on slavery. People know how to recognize slaves, how to differentiate them from free people. You wouldn't get far, and if you were caught, you've seen what happens to runaways, the whipping, the branding, the cross. The horror is enough to keep most slaves from even trying. Better to endure the misery you know than risk the agony of failed escape. So you don't run, you stay, you survive. You get through each day and hope for. What do you hope for? Manumission, freedom granted by your master. It happens sometimes. Masters free favored slaves in their wills, or living masters, pleased by years of faithful service, grant freedom as a reward. It's rare, but it happens. So you work hard, you stay obedient, you make yourself valuable, and you hope that someday, somehow, you might be freed. But even that hope is complicated. You've heard stories about freedmen and freedwomen, liberta and libertus. They're free, yes, legally free, but they're still tied to their former masters through obligations. They still bear the stigma of having been slaves. Society still looks down on them. Freedom doesn't erase the years of slavery, doesn't heal the trauma, doesn't give back what was taken. And many slaves die before ever tasting freedom. That's the statistical reality. Most slaves die in servitude, die young from overwork, from disease, from accidents, from punishments. This might be your fate. This dark, cold room might be where you spend your last conscious moment, surrounded by other people's misery, your own dreams dying with your body. It's a heavy thought, too heavy for this late hour. You try to push it away, but it clings to you like the darkness itself. Nearby, someone is crying, soft, muffled sobs. They're trying to be quiet. Crying too loudly can disturb others, can bring complaints, can make your suffering everyone's problem. But the grief leaks out anyway. You want to reach out, to offer comfort, but you don't know if it would be welcome. Everyone deals with this hell differently. Some want companionship in their misery. Some want to be alone with it. You compromise. You whisper into the darkness, "It's okay. I hear you. You're not alone." The crying doesn't stop, but it changes slightly, becomes a little less desperate. Maybe that helps. Maybe it doesn't. But it's the only thing you can offer, so you offer it. Someone else speaks from across the room. An older slave, one of the women who's been here for years. Her voice is rough, worn down by time and suffering. "First year is the hardest," she says. "You learn to carry it after a while. The weight doesn't get lighter, but you get stronger. You're not sure if that's true. You're not sure if you're getting stronger or just getting numb. But you don't argue. She's survived this long. Maybe she knows something you don't. Did it get easier for you?" you ask. Long silence. Then, no. But you learn which pains you can ignore and which ones you can't. You learn how to survive without really living. It's not much, but it's something. It's the most hopeless hope you've ever heard, but somehow it's comforting. Because it's honest, because it doesn't promise things will get better. It just promises you can survive. You close your eyes again. Try to let sleep take you. Your body is so tired, so deeply, profoundly tired. Surely sleep will come soon. You think about the gods. Some slaves pray. Pray to Jupiter, to Mars, to the household gods. Pray to their own gods from their own homelands, quietly, secretly, because slave religions are sometimes forbidden or restricted. Pray to anyone who might listen. You've tried praying. Sometimes it helps, gives you a sense of connection to something larger than your suffering. Sometimes it feels hollow, like shouting into a void that doesn't care. Tonight you try anyway. Not formal prayers, just thoughts directed upward, outward, toward whatever divine force might exist. Please, just please, let tomorrow be bearable. Let me survive this. Let there be some meaning to this suffering, some purpose, some end. You don't expect an answer. The gods, if they exist, don't seem particularly concerned with the fate of slaves. But the prayer itself is a small act of defiance, a refusal to let the system completely crush your spirit. You're still here, still human, still capable of hope, even desperate, threadbare hope. Your breathing is slowing now. Sleep is finally creeping in around the edges of consciousness. Your thoughts are becoming less coherent, more dreamlike. Images float through your mind, your mother's face, if you can remember it. The taste of freedom, if you ever knew it. The feeling of being human, truly human, not property, but a person. As you finally slip into sleep, your last conscious thought is a question that every slave asks themselves. How do I survive tomorrow? And the answer, the only answer, is the same way you survive today. One moment at a time, one task at a time, one breath at a time. You survive because the alternative is death, and some stubborn part of you refuses to give the system that satisfaction. You survive because maybe someday things will change. Maybe you'll be freed. Maybe you'll escape. Maybe the system itself will crumble. Probably not, but maybe. And maybe is enough to get you through one more night. The darkness holds you now. Sleep takes you finally mercifully. And for a few hours, you don't have to be a slave. You don't have to be anything at all. You just are. Tomorrow the wheel starts turning again. But tonight you rest. Such as it is. Such as it is. So let's come back now, you and I, come back from ancient Rome, from the cold stone floors and the endless labor, from the collar around your neck and the weight of absolute powerlessness. Let's return to this moment, to you listening to this story in comfort and safety. Let's be honest with each other. You wouldn't last a day. Neither would I. Neither would most people living in the modern world. And that's not an insult to us. It's not a judgment of our strength or courage or resilience. It's simply recognition of reality. We are not conditioned for that level of suffering. Our bodies haven't been hardened by childhood labor and constant physical demands. Our minds haven't been trained to accept powerlessness and abuse as normal. Our spirits haven't been broken and rebuilt around the framework of survival at any cost. Think about it. Really think about it. When was the last time you went a full day without food by choice? When was the last time you worked for 16 hours straight without breaks? When was the last time someone hit you and you had no recourse, no one to call, no way to make it stop? When was the last time you slept on a stone floor with no pillow, no heating, no comfort? For most of us, the answer is never. We've never experienced these things. We live in a world where we have rights imperfect, sometimes inadequately enforced, but they exist. We have choices about our lives, our bodies, our futures. We can leave situations that don't serve us. We can speak up when we're mistreated. We can rest when we're tired. These are luxuries. Profound luxuries that Roman slaves could never imagine. The physical demands alone would destroy most of us quickly. We're not built for that kind of sustained labor. Our muscles would give out. Our bodies would break down. Within days, we'd be injured, sick, unable to continue. And there would be no rest period for recovery. No sick days. No accommodation for injury. You work or you're punished. Those are the only options. But even if we somehow manage the physical aspect, the psychological torture would shatter us. Having no control over anything, not what you eat, when you sleep, where you go, what you do with your body. Being subject to violence at any moment, from anyone who outranks you, which is everyone. Having no identity beyond your function. Being property. Modern psychology recognizes what this does to human beings. It's called complex trauma. It creates lasting damage to how people relate to themselves, to others, to the world. And we'd be experiencing it constantly, from the moment we woke to the moment we collapsed into fitful sleep. The isolation would destroy us too. We're social creatures, and being cut off from real human connection, from relationships based on equality and choice, rather than shared captivity, that deprivation would wound us deeply. Yes, slaves formed connections with each other, but those connections existed under the shadow of potential separation, under the constant awareness that anyone could be sold away at any moment. And perhaps most devastating of all, the absence of hope. We're accustomed to believing that things can improve, that circumstances can change, That effort leads somewhere. But for a Roman slave, there was no guaranteed path forward. You could be the perfect slave, obedient, skilled, hard-working, and still die in servitude, or be sold to a worse situation, or be beaten for something you didn't do. There was no justice, no fairness, no cosmic balance, ensuring that goodness would be rewarded. That hopelessness, that would eat away at us from the inside. So no, you wouldn't last a day as a Roman slave, not because you're weak, but because the system was designed to break human beings, to reduce people to functions, to extract labor and obedience through the threat and reality of violence. Even the slaves who survived it, who lived for years or decades in servitude, they didn't escape unscathed. They bore scars, physical and psychological. They lived with trauma that never fully healed. They found ways to endure, to survive, to maintain some sense of self despite everything. But it cost them. It cost them tremendously. Understanding this, really understanding it, does something important. It helps us grasp the magnitude of historical suffering, helps us recognize that the enslaved millions whose names we'll never know, whose stories were never recorded, who lived and died as property, they endured something almost unimaginable. It also helps us recognize the reality of modern slavery, because slavery didn't end in ancient Rome. It continued through the centuries, evolved, took new forms, and it still exists today. Right now, in our modern world, millions of people are enslaved, trafficked for labor or sex, held in bonded servitude, trapped in situations where they have no freedom, no choice, no escape. The details are different. The legal frameworks have changed, but the fundamental horror remains the same. Human beings treated as property, denied their humanity, exploited for others' benefit. So when we look back at Roman slavery and think, I wouldn't last a day, we should also look around at our present world and think, this is still happening. What am I doing about it? The story we've walked through tonight isn't just history. It's a reminder, a warning, a call to remember that human dignity matters, that freedom matters, that the abuse of power destroys lives. And it's a call to gratitude for the freedoms we have, imperfect as our world may be, for the choices we can make, for the rights we possess, for the comfort we enjoy. These things aren't universal. They aren't guaranteed. They're precious. You wouldn't last a day as a Roman slave. Be grateful you don't have to. And remember those who did. Now let your mind drift a bit as we move into a different kind of story. A story about what happened when slaves stopped enduring and started fighting back. Let your breathing deepen. Let your body sink more heavily into comfort. We're going somewhere dramatic now, but the telling will be gentle, the pacing soft, meant to carry you toward sleep. Close your eyes and imagine the year is 73 BCE. The place is Capua, a city in southern Italy known for its gladiator schools, the ludi, where men were trained to kill each other for entertainment. Inside one of these schools, in the ludus belonging to a man named Lentulus Batiatus, something is stirring. The gladiators here are slaves, men captured in war, purchased from slave markets, condemned criminals. They live in cells, train with weapons under heavy guard, fight in arenas when commanded. Their lives are brutal, even by the standards of Roman slavery. They're fed well. A fit gladiator puts on a better show, but they're also beaten regularly, kept in chains, denied any semblance of freedom. Among them is a man named Spartacus. He's from Thrace, a region northeast of Greece. Some sources say he served as an auxiliary in the Roman army before deserting and being enslaved. Others say he was simply captured and sold. Regardless of how he arrived here, he's now a gladiator, trained to fight with the heavy rectangular shield and short sword of a Murmilla, one of several gladiator styles. Spartacus is strong, intelligent, charismatic, and he's had enough. He's been planning, quietly, carefully recruiting other gladiators who share his desperation and his courage. About 70 men eventually join his conspiracy. 70 slaves who decide that death fighting for freedom is better than life as entertainment for Roman crowds. They plan to escape using kitchen utensils, the only potential weapons they have access to. Knives, cleavers, spits. Primitive, but in desperate hands, deadly enough. The plan is discovered, or partially discovered. But before the guards can fully respond, the gladiators make their move. They fight their way out of the ludus. These are trained killers, remember. Men who've survived the arena. 70 slaves against the guards becomes a bloodbath that the slaves win. They escape into the countryside. And this is where the story becomes something larger than just an escape, because Spartacus doesn't just run. He doesn't try to disappear into some quiet life somewhere. Instead, he starts gathering followers. Escaped slaves join him. Field workers from nearby estates, hearing that someone is fighting back, flee their masters to join this growing band. Then more slaves, then more. The numbers swell impossibly fast. Within weeks, Spartacus commands hundreds, then thousands. They base themselves on Mount Vesuvius, yes, that Vesuvius, the volcano that would later bury Pompeii. But in 73 BCE, it's dormant and covered in vegetation. The slopes provide shelter, defensive position, a gathering place for an army of the formerly enslaved. Rome sends troops to deal with what they assume will be a minor disturbance. A few thousand soldiers should be enough to crush some escaped slaves. But Spartacus isn't just any escaped slave. He has military training, tactical intelligence, leadership ability, and an army of people who had nothing left to lose. The first Roman force is defeated, utterly. Spartacus and his followers don't just win, they capture weapons, armor, supplies. They arm themselves with Roman military equipment taken from dead soldiers. The slaves are becoming an army. More slaves join. The numbers grow staggering. 10,000, 20,000. Estimates eventually reach 120,000, though exact numbers are impossible to verify. But whether it's 70,000 or 120,000, the point is the same. This is no longer a small escape. This is a massive uprising that threatens the very foundation of Roman society. Imagine what this meant. Imagine being a slave on a farm, in a household, in a workshop, and hearing the news. Slaves are winning. Slaves are defeating Roman legions. There's an army of freed slaves, and they're getting stronger every day. For the first time in most slaves' lives, there's hope. Real, tangible hope. The system that seemed immutable, eternal, all-powerful, it's being challenged. And it's losing. Spartacus leads his army through southern Italy. They defeat Roman force after Roman force. Praetor Gaius Claudius Glaber is defeated. Then Praetor Publius Varinius. These aren't minor skirmishes. These are significant military victories. The Senate in Rome begins to panic. This isn't supposed to be possible. Slaves don't win battles. Slaves don't threaten Rome, but they are. The rebel army moves north toward the Alps. Spartacus's plan seems to be to escape Italy entirely, cross the Alps, disperse his followers to their various homelands, let them return to the lives they had before Rome enslaved them. It's a reasonable plan, a humane plan. It would give tens of thousands of people their freedom without requiring the complete destruction of Rome. But here's where the story becomes complicated, because not everyone in Spartacus's army agrees with this plan. Some want to stay in Italy, want to raid, to plunder, to take revenge on the system that brutalized them. There are divisions within the rebel leadership. Spartacus's authority, though strong, isn't absolute. These are free people now, and free people disagree. There's also the reality that many of these escaped slaves have nowhere to go. They were born in slavery, or they've been enslaved so long they have no homeland to return to. Italy is all they know. Leaving it means what? Wandering in foreign lands with no resources, no support? Some choose to stay and fight rather than face that uncertain future. The army turns back south, and Rome, which has been reeling from these defeats, finally sends serious military force. Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the richest men in Rome, is given command of 8 legions, 40,000 trained soldiers, well-equipped, well-supplied. Crassus is brutal in his approach. When some of his soldiers show cowardice in early engagements, he revives the ancient punishment of decimation. Every 10th man is beaten to death by his comrades. It's meant to show that Crassus's soldiers should fear him more than they fear the slaves. It works. His army becomes disciplined, ruthless. The tide begins to turn. Spartacus wins some engagements against Crassus, but he's being driven south toward the toe of Italy. He tries to cross to Sicily, a boat crossing that would take his army to an island where they might regroup or escape. But the pirates who promised to transport them betray them, taking payment and then leaving the army stranded. Spartacus is trapped. Crassus builds a wall across the narrow peninsula, a massive fortification designed to pen in the rebels. For a while it works. The slave army is contained, supplies dwindling, options narrowing. But Spartacus is resourceful. On a snowy winter night, he leads a portion of his army across the wall, filling the defensive ditches with earth and logs, overwhelming the guards. They break out, but not everyone makes it. The army is fragmenting now, breaking into smaller groups, the cohesion that made them powerful, dissolving under the pressure of constant pursuit. Crassus pursues, relentlessly. The final battle comes in 71 BCE in the region of Lucania. Spartacus, knowing defeat is likely, tries one last desperate tactic. He attempts to kill Crassus personally. If he can cut the head off the Roman force, maybe, just maybe, his army can escape. He fights his way toward where Crassus commands. The ancient sources say he killed 2 centurions in his personal combat, that he fought with the fury of a man who knows this is his last stand, but he never reaches Crassus. The Roman soldiers surround him, bring him down. Spartacus dies on the battlefield, weapon in hand, fighting to the end. The battle becomes a massacre. Thousands of rebels are killed. The Roman legions show no mercy. This isn't war, this is punishment. This is Rome reasserting its dominance, its power, its right to own human beings. 6,000 prisoners are taken. And here's where the story becomes a horror that echoes through history. Crassus orders them crucified, all 6,000. Along the Appian Way, the main road from Capua to Rome crosses are erected. one after another. For over 120 miles, the road is lined with crucified slaves, each one nailed or tied to their cross, left to die slowly in the sun, left to hang there for days afterward as their bodies decomposed. This is Rome's message. This is what happens when you rebel. This is what happens when you dare to imagine freedom. This is what awaits anyone who challenges our power. Travelers on the Appian Way would have walked for days, passing cross after cross after cross. The smell alone would have been overwhelming 6,000 bodies rotting in the Mediterranean heat. The sight would have been nightmare fuel, the kind of thing that stays with you forever. The sound moaning, crying, screaming from those still alive would have haunted anyone who heard it. This was deliberate psychological warfare, not just punishment, but theater, a display of power designed to break the spirit of every enslaved person in the empire. See what resistance brings, see what hope costs, and it worked, in a way. There were no major slave rebellions after Spartacus for many years. The crucifixes along the Appian Way served their purpose. They terrified. They intimidated. They reminded everyone that Rome's power was absolute. But here's what Rome couldn't kill: the memory, the story. The fact that for 3 years slaves had fought back and won battles. For 3 years the impossible had become possible. Slaves had defeated legions, had created an army, had proven that they were not inherently inferior, not naturally suited to servitude, but human beings capable of organization, strategy, warfare. Spartacus became a legend. His name survived when the names of most slaves vanished into obscurity. Through the centuries, his story has inspired others: rebels, revolutionaries, anyone fighting against systems of oppression. Because even though he lost, even though the rebellion was crushed brutally, completely, he proved something important. The enslaved could fight back. The system could be challenged. The powerful were not invincible. That's why we still tell this story 2,000 years later. Not because it has a happy ending, it doesn't. Not because rebellion succeeded, it failed catastrophically, but because it happened at all, because 70 men decided that freedom was worth dying for, because thousands more joined them, because for 3 years the impossible became real. And here's the thing to understand as you drift toward sleep. Rome's brutal response to Spartacus's rebellion wasn't a sign of strength. It was a sign of fear. If Rome was truly confident in the stability of its slave system, if slaves were truly content in their servitude, there would have been no need for such overwhelming violence, no need to crucify 6,000 people, no need to make such a dramatic example. The very brutality of the response reveals the truth. Rome was terrified. Terrified that other slaves would be inspired, terrified that the system that undergirded their entire economy, their entire way of life, might collapse if slaves realized they could resist. So they crushed the rebellion with maximum force, killed Spartacus, crucified his followers, made sure that no slave in the empire could miss the message. And yet, the story survived, the memory survived. The knowledge that slaves had risen up, had fought, had died free rather than live enslaved, that survived. Even crucified along the Appian Way, even in their moment of ultimate defeat, those 6,000 sent a message too. We chose death over slavery. We chose to fight rather than submit. We chose to be human rather than property, even if it cost us everything. That's a powerful message. A dangerous message from Rome's perspective, but an important one. As you let this story settle into your mind, as you allow sleep to take you, remember, Spartacus and his followers didn't overthrow the system. They didn't end Roman slavery, but they proved it could be challenged. They proved that enslaved people were capable of the same courage, leadership, and military prowess as any Roman citizen. They lost the war, but they won something perhaps more enduring. They proved their humanity in a system designed to deny it. And sometimes, in the face of overwhelming oppression, that's all you can do. Assert your humanity. Refuse to be reduced to property. Fight, even if you can't win, because fighting is an act of dignity in itself. Spartacus died free. His followers died free. For people who lived in chains, that meant something. Let that thought carry you into rest now. Let the weight of their courage, their sacrifice, their refusal to accept the unacceptable, let that settle over you like a blanket. Heavy, but also somehow comforting. A reminder that even in the darkest systems, human beings can find the strength to resist. Sleep now. Dream of freedom. Dream of courage. Dream of a world where no one is property. And rest easy, knowing that you live in such a world. For now, let your breathing deepen even more now. Let your body become heavier, more relaxed. We're shifting to a quieter story. A story about the slaves who don't appear in dramatic rebellions or epic battles. The ones who lived and died without fanfare, without recognition, without their names being remembered. The invisible ones. When we think of Roman slaves, we often picture field workers or household servants. And yes, those roles were common. But slavery in Rome touched every aspect of society, every profession, every type of work. There were slaves in places you might not expect, doing jobs you might not associate with enslavement. Let's start with the imperial slaves, the servi Caesaris. These were slaves who belonged not to private citizens, but to the emperor himself, and some of them held positions of remarkable responsibility. Imagine being a slave who manages the water supply for Rome. You're responsible for ensuring that the aqueducts function properly. That water flows to the public fountains, that the system feeding over 1 million people doesn't fail. You have subordinates both free and enslaved working under your direction. You make technical decisions about repairs and maintenance. You control a crucial piece of infrastructure, but you're still a slave. You own nothing. Your expertise, your knowledge, your daily decisions that keep Rome functioning, all of it belongs to the emperor. You could be sold, could be punished, could be killed. Your authority is real but contingent, existing only as long as your owner permits it. Or imagine being a slave accountant in the imperial bureaucracy. You handle financial records for the empire. You see numbers that citizens would never access. You know state secrets simply by virtue of managing the empire's books. You're educated, skilled, trusted with information that could bring down powerful people. And yet, you're property. Your literacy, your numeracy, your discretion valuable, yes, but not sufficient to make you free. You exercise power without being powerful. You have access without having rights. There's a bitter irony in this. Some imperial slaves lived better than many free citizens, with better housing, better food, more interesting work. They might walk through Rome with confidence, conduct business, interact with senators and magistrates, but they couldn't own property in their own names, couldn't vote, couldn't legally marry. Every privilege they enjoyed existed at the pleasure of their owner. Now think about the pedagogues, the slave teachers. These were often Greek slaves, educated men captured in war, or purchased specifically for their learning. They taught Roman children grammar, rhetoric, mathematics, Greek language, and literature. They shaped young minds, imparting knowledge and values. Many pedagogues formed genuine bonds with the children they taught, spent years with them, watching them grow, taking pride in their accomplishments. Some Roman writers spoke fondly of their pedagogues, crediting them with their education and character formation. But that pedagogue couldn't leave, couldn't refuse to teach if he was tired, sick, or simply needed a day for himself. His knowledge belonged to his master. His time belonged to his master. And when those children grew up and inherited slaves of their own, they might look at their former teacher with affection, but still as property, not as an equal, not as the educated man who shaped their minds. Then there are the wet nurses, the nutresses, enslaved women forced to breastfeed their master's children. This role came with particular cruelty. To be a wet nurse, you had to have recently given birth yourself. You had your own child, your own infant, who needed you. But your milk belonged to your master's child. Roman families often took enslaved infants away from their mothers early, either selling them or assigning them to other work, so that the mother's milk could go entirely to the master's baby. Imagine that. Imagine feeling your body produce nourishment meant for your own child, and being forced to give it to someone else's baby instead. Imagine the bond that forms because you can't help forming a bond when you're feeding an infant, holding them, soothing them. But that child isn't yours, will never be yours, will grow up to be your owner or to own slaves themselves. The intimacy of nursing creates no obligation on the master's part. You give the most fundamental form of nourishment and receive nothing but continued servitude in return, and your own child, somewhere else being fed by another slave or given inferior nutrition, suffering from your absence. The trauma of this separation is almost unimaginable, but it happened thousands of times to thousands of women throughout Roman history. Let's talk about the children, slave children. They started working young as 6 or 7 years old. Small children were valuable for certain tasks. Their small hands could do delicate work. They could fit into small spaces. They could be trained before they developed the will to resist. A child born into slavery knew nothing else, never experienced freedom, so couldn't miss it the way someone enslaved later in life might. But that doesn't make their situation less tragic. In some ways, it's worse. To never know that humans can choose their own paths, to grow up believing that servitude is simply the natural order of things, that's a theft of imagination, of possibility, of human potential. Child slaves worked in workshops, in households, in fields. They served at table, carried messages, cleaned, fetched water. They were trained in trades, becoming blacksmiths, weavers, potters, whatever their masters needed. And they had no childhood in any meaningful sense, no playtime, no education unless their work required it, no protection from abuse. Some child slaves were particularly vulnerable to sexual exploitation. Beautiful children, both boys and girls, were sought after for households where they would be used not just for labor, but for their master's pleasure. This abuse was legal, normalized, barely remarked upon in Roman sources. The trauma inflicted on these children is almost impossible to comprehend. As these children grew, they remained slaves. Childhood slavery led to adult slavery, led to elderly slavery. There was no aging out of the system, no finishing your term, no reaching an age where you were released. You worked until you couldn't work anymore, and then you became a burden, unwanted, sometimes discarded. Consider the disabled slaves. Disability in ancient Rome was dangerous for everyone, but especially for slaves. If you were injured on the job, broke a leg, lost an eye, became unable to work, you lost your value. Masters might try to heal you if they thought you could return to productivity. But if the injury was permanent, severe, if healing seemed unlikely, some disabled slaves were simply abandoned, turned out onto the streets with nothing, left to beg or starve. The Emperor Claudius passed a law saying that slaves abandoned due to illness were automatically freed, which sounds humane until you realize what it meant in practice. It meant masters could abandon sick or disabled slaves without even the obligation of continued ownership. Freedom granted to someone too ill or injured to survive was no kindness. It was washing hands of an inconvenience. Other disabled slaves were kept but relegated to the worst tasks, the ones that didn't require physical capability, or they were simply maintained minimally until they died, because disposing of human property required effort. Think about the sex slaves. We need to speak of them, even though the topic is painful. Roman brothels were full of enslaved prostitutes. Women and men forced into sex work with no ability to refuse customers, no control over their own bodies, no ability to escape. The conditions in these brothels were degrading. Small cells barely larger than beds, no privacy, no rest. Customers paid the brothel owner, not the slave. The slave received nothing except continued enslavement. Many developed diseases. Many died young. Some became pregnant, bearing children who would either be raised as future slaves or discarded. But sexual slavery wasn't confined to brothels. It existed in private homes. Masters had legal right to sexual access to their slaves. If you were an attractive slave, and attractive is dangerous here because it included children, you lived with constant vulnerability. You could be raped by your master's guests, by your master's children, and you had no recourse, no one to tell, no authority that would care. Some slaves were taken as concubines, forming relationships that looked almost like marriage, but were fundamentally coercive. The slave might be treated well, given gifts, even some affection, but the power imbalance remained. The master could end the arrangement at any time, could sell the slave, could move on to someone else. The slave's feelings, desires, consent, none of it mattered legally or socially. Now consider the elderly slaves. Those who survived decades of servitude reached old age still enslaved. Their bodies were broken by years of labor. Their hands gnarled with arthritis, their backs bent, their eyes failing. But there was no retirement for slaves, no pension, no rest earned by years of service. If they were fortunate, they might be given lighter duties in their old age, watching children doing simple tasks, sharing their expertise with younger slaves. But many masters saw elderly slaves as burdens, useless mouths to feed. Some were sold to worse situations, sent to mills or other terrible fates. Some were simply neglected, given minimal food and shelter, left to die of natural causes accelerated by poor care. Roman epitaphs sometimes mention elderly slaves freed in their masters' wills, finally granted manumission after 40, 50, 60 years of service, freed when they were too old to truly enjoy freedom, too broken to build new lives. It was a mercy, perhaps, but a bitter one. Freedom at 70, after a lifetime of slavery, is not really freedom. It's just dying with a different legal status. Let's talk about the married slave couples, those who formed genuine bonds despite their circumstances. Slaves could create partnerships, could love each other, could even be considered married in a social sense through contubernium. Some masters encouraged this, believing that slaves with families were more stable, less likely to run away. But these relationships existed under constant threat. Either partner could be sold away at any moment. There was no legal protection for slave families. A master who needed money could sell the husband to one buyer and the wife to another, separating them permanently. Children born to slave couples belonged to the mother's master and could be sold away from both parents. Despite this, slaves formed families, fell in love, raised children together when circumstances allowed, found moments of joy and connection in the midst of horror. The human need for love and companionship persisted even in slavery, even when loving someone meant risking the agony of losing them. These families existed in the shadows of history. Most left no records. We don't know their names, their stories, what they endured, and how they survived it. They're invisible to us now, as they were invisible to most Romans. Just part of the background. Just the people who made Roman society function while receiving no recognition, no rights, no chance at their own stories. And this invisibility is itself a kind of violence. To live and die without being seen, without being remembered, without leaving any mark on history to be erased so completely that we don't even know what we've lost. How many brilliant minds labored in slavery and never had a chance to contribute to philosophy, literature, science? How many loving parents raised children they couldn't protect? How many artists created beauty they couldn't claim as their own? The invisible slaves were everywhere. In every household, every business, every public space. They kept Rome functioning, kept the water flowing and the fires burning, and the children educated, and the sick tended. They were essential, and they were forgotten. As you drift toward deeper sleep now, carry this with you, the quiet suffering of millions whose names we'll never know. They weren't dramatic. They weren't heroes of rebellions. They just endured, day after day, year after year, their entire lives spent in service to others. They deserve to be remembered, even if we don't know their names. Even if we can't tell their individual stories, we can acknowledge that they existed, that they mattered, that their humanity persisted, even when the system denied it. The invisible slaves, the forgotten ones, the millions who made an empire function and received nothing in return. Sleep now and remember them. Let their quiet courage, the courage of simply surviving, accompany you into dreams. They lived. They endured. They were human. That's enough. That has to be enough. Rest now. We're in the final story now. Your breathing is slow and deep. Your body is heavy with approaching sleep. Let this last narrative carry you gently into rest. We're going to talk about something that might seem like it should be hopeful freedom, but you'll see that even freedom from slavery was complicated, bittersweet, marked forever by what came before, manumission. The word means release from the hand. It's the formal process by which a slave becomes legally free, and it happened. Not often enough, not to most slaves, but it happened. Some slaves did gain their freedom. There were several ways it could occur. The most common was manumission by will. A master dying might free some or all of his slaves as a final act. This was considered generous, a sign of magnanimity. Some masters did it out of genuine affection for long-serving slaves. Others did it because freed slaves became clients of their former master's family, which increased the family's social prestige. Some did it simply because they could afford to be generous when they no longer needed the labor. But think about what this means. You might serve a master for 40 years hoping for freedom, and your hope depends entirely on being mentioned in the will, which you won't know about until the master dies. And even then, wills could be contested. Family members who inherited the estate might challenge manumissions, arguing that the estater wasn't of sound mind, that the manumission should be voided, that they need the slave's labor or their value. So you might spend your entire life working in the hope of freedom, only to have that hope snatched away by heirs who see you as property too valuable to release. There was also manumission vindicta freedom granted before a magistrate through a formal legal process. A master could bring a slave to a praetor, and through a ceremonial procedure involving a rod touched to the slave's head, declare them free. This could happen at any time, for any reason the master chose: exemplary service, personal affection, strategic advantage. Sometimes masters freed skilled slaves who would then continue working for them as paid employees, now motivated by wages instead of fear. Another method was manumission sensu, being registered as a free citizen during the census. This was less common, but legally binding. If your master allowed you to be recorded as free during the official population count, you became so. Later, as Christianity spread through the empire, manumission in church became possible. A master could declare a slave free before the congregation, making God and the community witnesses to the act. This added spiritual weight to the legal transaction. But here's what all these methods have in common. They depend entirely on the master's will. You, as a slave, have no power to free yourself through your own efforts or virtue. No matter how hard you work, how loyal you are, how valuable you make yourself, freedom comes only if your owner chooses to grant it. Your fate remains in someone else's hands. Some slaves, however, had another option: purchasing their freedom. Remember the peculum we mentioned earlier? That small personal fund that some masters allowed slaves to accumulate? Some slaves spent decades saving every coin, every small payment, every tip or gift, hoping to eventually buy themselves. The price varied wildly. A young, healthy, skilled slave might cost thousands of denarii. An older, less capable slave might be cheaper. But either way, the amount represented years or decades of saving. You might start as a young person, saving your peculium, hoping that by middle age you'll have enough, hoping your master doesn't raise the price, hoping you aren't sold to someone else who won't honor the arrangement, hoping you live long enough to see freedom, and some did. Some slaves managed it, purchased their freedom, received their manumission documents, became liberty freedmen or liberté freedwomen. So what happened then? What was life like after slavery? First, understand that Roman freedom wasn't one simple status. It existed in degrees. A libertas was not the same as someone born free. You were legally free, yes, but you carried permanent markers of your former status. Your name changed. Freed slaves typically took their former master's family name, the nomen, while keeping a version of their slave name as their cognomen. So if you were a slave called Demetrius owned by Marcus Tullius Cicero, upon manumission you might become Marcus Tullius Demetrius. Your name itself advertised your history. Everyone who heard it knew you were a freedman. Your manumission documents had to be carried or kept safe. These were proof of your free status. Without them, you could be accused of being a runaway slave, could be seized and re-enslaved. The paperwork of freedom became as important as freedom itself. Socially, you remained in a lower tier. Roman society was obsessively hierarchical, and freedmen occupied an ambiguous space. You were free, but not fully free. Not a slave, but not quite a full citizen either. You couldn't hold political office, couldn't serve in the legions, though you could serve in the Navy or in auxiliary units. Your children born after your manumission would be full citizens, but you yourself never would be. And you still owed obligations to your former master, now called your patronus, your patron. This wasn't just a social courtesy, it was legal requirement. You owed your patron opere services or labor that you had to provide. Maybe you worked for them a certain number of days per year. Maybe you paid them a portion of your income. Maybe you supported their political ambitions, showed up at their morning salutatio to swell their crowd of clients, voted as they directed in elections. Your freedom was real, but it came with strings attached. You had escaped slavery, but not the relationship of subordination to your former master. Economically, most freed slaves started with nothing. The peculum you saved to buy your freedom was exhausted in the purchase. You had no property, no savings, no family support network if you'd been separated from family during slavery. You needed to find work immediately to survive. Some freedmen leveraged the skills they'd learned as slaves. If you were a trained accountant, you could offer those services. If you were a skilled craftsman, you could ply your trade. If you were educated, you might teach or serve as a secretary. The skills that made you valuable as a slave could make you successful as a freedman. And some freedmen did become quite successful. We know of freed slaves who became wealthy merchants, who ran successful businesses, who accumulated property and influence. The satirist Petronius created a fictional character called Trimalchio, a wildly wealthy freedman whose ostentatious dinner parties mocked the pretensions of those trying to overcome their servile origins. The character was exaggerated but based on a real phenomenon. Some freed slaves prospered, but prosperity didn't erase stigma. Wealthy freedmen were still looked down upon by the old aristocratic families. Their money was new money, tainted by its association with trade and former servitude. Senators might need their loans, but wouldn't consider them social equals. The stigma of slavery followed you even into wealth, and most freedmen didn't become wealthy anyway. Most struggled, worked hard to survive in a society that still looked down on them, that offered fewer opportunities, that reminded them constantly of what they had been. Then there were the physical marks. If you'd been branded as a runaway, that mark remained, literally burned into your skin for life. Even after manumission, people could see it, could know what you'd done, could judge you for it. Scars from beatings covered your back. Your hands might be deformed from years of hard labor. Your body told the story of your enslavement even when your legal status said you were free. The psychological scars were deeper and less visible. Modern psychology recognizes that trauma doesn't end when the traumatic situation ends. The years of abuse, of powerlessness, of living in constant fear, these experiences change a person fundamentally. You might be legally free, but your mind still carries the conditioning of slavery. Hypervigilance, difficulty trusting, startled responses to raised voices or sudden movements, the expectation of violence, the inability to truly believe in your own autonomy. You're free, but you don't feel free. Not entirely. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And if you had family still enslaved, your freedom was bittersweet at best. Imagine being freed while your spouse remains enslaved. Your children remain enslaved. You're free to leave, to build a new life, but how can you? How can you abandon them? Some freed slaves spent their freedom trying to purchase their family members, worked tirelessly to save enough money to buy the freedom of a spouse, a child, a parent. This became their new purpose, not enjoying their own freedom, but using it to free others. Noble, certainly, but also heartbreaking. The shadow of slavery extended over your freedom, coloring everything, making every choice complicated. There's a poignancy in the epitaphs of freed slaves that have survived. These were people who, having gained freedom and some measure of success, wanted desperately to be remembered, to prove they mattered, to leave some mark on history that said, I was here, I was a person, I had value. They commissioned elaborate tombstones, more elaborate than they could probably afford. They listed their accomplishments, their trades, their freed status prominently. They wanted the world to know they'd overcome slavery, that they'd made something of themselves despite the odds. But what strikes you reading these epitaphs is the underlying desperation, the need to justify their existence, the awareness that as freed slaves they occupied a precarious position in society's memory. Without these monuments, they'd be forgotten. They'd vanish into history as thoroughly as the slaves who never gained freedom. So they spent their limited resources on tombstones, on memory, on the desperate hope that future generations would know they lived, they mattered, they were human. And here we are, 2,000 years later, reading those inscriptions, remembering them, honoring their need to be remembered. It worked, in a way. Some of them survived in memory. Not many, but some. The children of freed slaves had it better. Roman law was clear. Children born after their parents' manumission were full citizens. Not freedmen, but ingenuously freeborn. They carried no legal stigma, no formal restrictions. They could hold office, serve in legions, marry into any family that would have them. But social prejudice persisted. Everyone knew whose children they were. Everyone knew their grandparent or parent had been a slave. That history didn't disappear in one generation. Maybe not in 2 or 3. The stain of slavery, because that's how Roman society viewed it, as a stain, took generations to fade. Still, this represented hope. The hope that your children would have opportunities you never did, that your grandchildren might fully integrate into Roman society, that the suffering you endured would purchase a better future for your descendants. Many freed slaves clung to this hope, working hard to give their children education, apprenticeships, dowries, anything, to help them succeed in a society that would judge them for their lineage. Freedom from slavery was not a fairy tale ending. It was complicated, messy, marked by continued struggle and prejudice. It was better than slavery, absolutely better. No one owned you. No one could beat you legally. No one could sell you. You had rights, agency, choice. These were profound improvements. But freedom after slavery was not the same as never having been enslaved. The experience changed you. Society's view of you changed. You carried the past with you, visible or invisible, for the rest of your life. And yet, freed slaves kept going, built lives, raised families, created businesses, left legacies. They took their broken freedom and made something of it. Not perfect, not untainted, but something. They survived slavery, and then they survived freedom, which in its own way required different, but no less real courage. As you drift into sleep now, carry this last thought. Freedom is precious, but freedom after trauma requires healing. Freedom after oppression requires support. Freedom after slavery required, and still requires, not just legal status change, but social transformation, understanding, recognition that the scars don't disappear when the chains come off. The freed slaves of Rome showed us this. They lived it. They carried those scars into freedom and survived anyway. Let that thought settle over you like a blanket, heavy with meaning, but also somehow comforting. They survived. They persisted. They proved that freedom, complicated as it was still worth having, still worth fighting for, still worth the struggle. Rest now. Let their resilience accompany you into dreams. They were enslaved. They were freed. They survived both. Sleep now in freedom, in safety, in peace. And so, dear friends, we've walked together through a world that existed 2,000 years ago. A world of stone and cruelty, of suffering and survival, of human beings treated as property. We've felt the cold of the slave quarters, the heat of the midday sun, the weight of endless labor. We've witnessed rebellion and its brutal suppression. We've remembered those who were forgotten. We've understood that even freedom from slavery came with complications and scars. It's been a heavy journey, hasn't it? The kind of story that sits with you, that changes something in how you see the world. And that's appropriate. These stories deserve weight. The millions who lived and died in Roman slavery deserve to be remembered, even if we don't know their names, even if we can't tell their individual stories. They were human. They mattered. Their suffering was real. Perhaps tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you'll carry some awareness with you. Gratitude, maybe, for the freedoms we have. The ability to choose where we go, what we do, how we live. The protection of laws that recognize our humanity. The comfort of knowing we're not property, not owned, not subject to another's absolute power. These things are not universal across history. They're not guaranteed even now. They're precious. Maybe you'll also carry awareness of the resilience of the human spirit. Because that's what we've really been exploring tonight, isn't it? Not just suffering, but survival. Not just oppression, but the ways people found to endure it. The small rebellions of maintaining your humanity when the system denies it. The courage of loving when love makes you vulnerable. The strength of continuing when continuing seems impossible. The slaves of Rome survived horrors we can barely imagine. And some of them did more than survive, they resisted. They created, they loved, they left marks on history despite every attempt to erase them. Spartacus fought for freedom even knowing he'd probably die in the attempt. The invisible slaves kept their humanity. even when treated as less than human. The freed slaves built new lives even carrying the scars of their past. That's what humans do. We survive, we persist. We find meaning even in suffering. We create connections even in isolation. We hope even when hope seems irrational. And we remember. We tell stories like the one we've shared tonight, not to dwell in darkness, but to honor those who lived through it, to learn from history, to ensure that understanding suffering, even suffering from 2 millennia ago, makes us more compassionate, more aware, more determined to prevent such suffering in our own time. Because slavery didn't end in ancient Rome. It continued through the centuries, took new forms, afflicted millions more. And it still exists today. Right now, in our modern world, people are enslaved, trafficked, bonded, exploited, denied their freedom and their humanity. The details differ, but the fundamental crime remains the same. So let this story we've shared tonight be more than just history. Let it be a reminder that human dignity matters, that freedom matters, that the way we treat each other matters. Let it inspire you to awareness, to action, to whatever small part you can play in making the world more just. But for now, for right now, in this moment, let yourself rest. You're safe. You're free. You're surrounded by comfort. These are gifts, blessings, precious things. Receive them with gratitude. May you rest peacefully tonight in comfort and safety. May you wake tomorrow with freedom to choose your path, to live according to your own will, to be fully human in all the ways that were denied to those we've remembered tonight. May you carry their stories gently in your heart. May you honor their suffering by valuing your freedom. May you honor their humanity by recognizing it in everyone you meet. You are valued. You are free. You are enough. You are human, fully and completely, in ways that no one can take from you. Let the darkness be gentle with you tonight. Let sleep come softly, peacefully, without resistance. Close your eyes. Breathe deeply. Feel the weight of your body, supported and safe. Let go of the day. Let go of these stories for now. Let go of everything except the simple rhythm of your breath. Drift away, dear friend. Drift into rest, into peace, into the deep, restorative sleep you deserve. You've walked through history with me tonight. You've witnessed suffering and survival. You've honored those who came before. Now it's time to rest. Good night, dear friends. Good night.